After my sister died, nothing felt real anymore. Not the funeral, not the endless messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, not even the numb way my mother moved through the house like she'd forgotten what doors were for. I kept telling myself I was fine, that I was coping the way people cope with long walks, bad TV, and sleep that came in heavy waves. But that wasn't true. I wasn't sleeping. Not really. I would drift off and jolt awake in the middle of the night, paralyzed, unable to scream, unable to breathe, with the same vision playing behind my eyes every time. My sister's silhouette, backlit in a doorway, sobbing, her hands covering her face. But the crying never sounded quite human. It was slower, broken, like something mimicking pain without ever having felt it. That was when I started hearing about grief loops and the sleep paralysis groups online where people shared their stories. That's where I found Maya. Maya wasn't a therapist. She was very clear about that. While she'd spent years studying emotion-bound sleep paralysis phenomena, especially those connected to traumatic loss, she didn't make promises. She didn't advertise her services. She just posted stories, first-person accounts of people who had lost someone close, then began experiencing near-nightly paralysis episodes centered around the person they lost. The strange part was how similar they all sounded. Same time of night, same whispered phrases, same feeling of being watched by a weepy figure that never blinked. What really got me, though, was one line she wrote. "It's not a dream. It's a presence. It doesn't want your memories. It wants your sorry or guilt." That line stuck with me because that's what I felt every night. Guilt, thick and choking, like I'd left something undone when my sister passed. So I reached out to Maya, and she replied almost instantly. She invited me to her property in Oregon, to cabins deep in the forest, far from the nearest town. She called it a space for emotional detox through monitored rest. At first, I thought it sounded like a retreat, some kind of meditative thing. But when I asked about the process, she said the forest isolation helped dampen the echo. That phrase confused me, but I was too desperate to question it. I just needed rest. Real rest. Sleep without visions. A night without the feeling that my body was being quietly studied by something I couldn't name. I didn't tell my mom where I was going. I didn't even tell my friends. I just packed a small bag, booked a one-way ticket, and told myself I'd come back when I could dream without crying, or when the crying stopped sounding like it belonged to something else. The cabin was smaller than I expected, but peaceful. A single-story structure tucked between moss-covered trees, with a wide porch and creaky wooden steps. Maya met me at the trailhead and walked me in. She was older than I imagined, mid-40s, maybe, but there was something sharp about her presence. Not cruel, just very focused, like she saw things you didn't and didn't waste time pretending otherwise. She didn't ask about my sister. She just told me to settle in, explained that I'd be sleeping alone in the guest cabin nearby, and handed me a small wooden pendant shaped like a teardrop. "Keep this near you when you sleep," she said. "It gives the grief somewhere else to go." It sounded absurd, but I took it. I would have taken anything at that point if it meant one night without waking up frozen in my own body. There was no cell reception out there, no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just the wind in the trees, the smell of old earth, and the sound of my own thoughts, which turned out to be far louder than I remembered. The first night, I actually did sleep. No paralysis, no dreams. I woke up groggy, but rested. Maya brought me tea that morning and said, "That means it's starting." I didn't know what she meant, and she didn't explain. The second night was different. I felt the weight come back, the heavy pull in my chest, the tingling at the edge of sleep that told me I wasn't alone in the room, but I didn't see her. I just heard the crying, closer than before, not behind the door this time, right at the edge of the bed, soft and desperate, like someone had run out of words and could only make sound. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream, but I felt the pendant in my hand, warm, almost pulsing, and then the crying stopped, just like that, like someone holding their breath. I woke up with tears on my face, my own. I think the next morning, Maya looked at me for a long time before saying anything. Then she asked, "Did it touch you?" I shook my head. She nodded like that mattered more than anything. Then she told me something I still haven't been able to forget. "It's not your sister. It wears her sorrow, not her skin. It speaks through what you won't say out loud." That was when I realized Maya had lost someone too. I don't know who, and I didn't ask, but there was something in her voice that told me she'd heard the same cries once, maybe still did. She warned me to keep the pendant on me at all times. If it knows where the pain comes from, it can find a way in. But if you displace it, if you give it something, it might feed on that instead. I asked her what would happen if I didn't. She just said, then it follows you home. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of the bed, pendant in hand, listening for a voice that might be hers, or mine, or neither. By the third day, I realized this wasn't some spiritual detox or therapy-like experience. Maya didn't ask how I was feeling, or make soft, encouraging sounds when I talked. She wasn't here to process my grief, she was here to manage it. She told me the weeping figure wasn't a hallucination or a trauma echo or a product of insomnia. It was real, but not in the way people understood real things. It feeds on unresolved sorrow. She said one morning while we boiled tea, leaves in a cast iron pot, not sadness, not pain, sorrow, the kind that loops because no one else can hear it. She believed this thing, this presence, was drawn to grief that had nowhere else to go. And for people like me, who avoided therapy and kept everything locked inside, it found a home in the space between waking and sleep. The paralysis was its waiting room, and the moment we let it speak through the faces we remembered, it moved, in, quiet, slow, permanent. I didn't understand how she planned to get rid of it. When I asked, Maya said, you don't get rid of it, you starve it. But first, you have to name what it's feeding on. That's where the journals came, and every day, she'd give me a fresh page with a single prompt written at the top. Things like, what didn't you say at the funeral? Or what did she leave behind that no one else saw? I thought it was going to be like therapy homework. It wasn't. The act of writing stirred something deep, memories I hadn't touched since the week after my sister's death. The guilt came fast and hot. Regrets I didn't know I was still carrying. Things I hadn't said. Phone calls I didn't return. A voicemail I deleted without ever listening to. Every night after writing, I'd sleep with the pendant pressed against my chest. Every night. The weeping came back louder. The crying changed tones, like it was learning something about me. And every morning, the pages were warped at the edges like someone had breathed across them all night long. Maya watched me closely, not like a caretaker, but like someone waiting to see if I'd break. You have to move it, she said on the fifth night. Shift the pain from memory to object. If it stays inside you, it never loses weight. I didn't understand what she meant until she showed me a box. Inside were dozens of small, personal items, each one labeled. A guitar pick from my brother, her name tagged from hospice. His lighter from the cabin. Each object had been someone's grief anchor, something they used to carry the sorrow outside of themselves. Maya said it wasn't magic. It was about energy. Grief doesn't vanish, she said. It's stored. The key is giving it something real to cling to that isn't you. She handed me a small wooden frame. Place her photo inside. Sleep with it near your bed, not under your pillow. Let it witness instead of haunt. That night, I printed the only picture I had of my sister and slipped it into the frame. She was smiling in it, but when I looked closer, the edges of her mouth seemed slightly strained. That night was different. The paralysis came faster, like a trap I walked into with my eyes open. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, but I could hear. The crying wasn't just closer, now it was in my ear. A ragged, shallow whimper that carried just enough rhythm to be human, but the cadence was wrong, like it had learned grief from watching videos of people sobbing without ever knowing why they did it. Then came the voice, not hers, not mine, something between. It whispered, say it, over and over, louder each time. Say it. The voice was coming from beneath the bed this time, rising through the mattress like smoke through a vent. I tried to scream, but couldn't. I tried to think of the pendant, but my mind was full of guilt. The photo frame fell off the nightstand. I heard it crack, and the moment it did, the whisper stopped. Silence returned. Then came the weight, not heavy, but certain. Something sat on the bed, right by my legs, and didn't move until dawn. I told Maya everything the next morning. She didn't blink. She didn't even flinch when I told her the voice had spoken. She just asked, did it say your sister's name? When I said no, she nodded slowly. Then it doesn't have her yet, but it's close. It's listening for how you say it. Once it gets the tone right, it can wear her face properly. That's when I realized what she meant by feeding. The grief eater didn't just appear to torment you, it became you. It absorbed your sorrow until it could reflect it back. Perfectly imperfect, just off enough to feel more real than memory. You need to confront the worst of it. Maya said, the moment you keep burying, that's where it lives. She told me to write a letter to my sister. but not to explain anything, just to tell her what I had never told anyone else, the truth. I didn't know if I could. I wasn't even sure I wanted to, because part of me still believed that maybe, just maybe, the thing at the foot of my bed was her, crying for me to say something I should have said while she was alive. I didn't write the letter that day. I sat with the blank page in front of me for hours, pen in hand, waiting for the words to come, but they didn't. Every time I tried to start, I felt this pressure behind my ribs, like something knew I was getting close and didn't want me to open that door. Instead, I walked the perimeter of the cabin, trying to clear my head. The forest didn't help. It was too still. No birds, no insects, just trees holding their breath. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore, it was expectant. Like the land itself knew what was coming and was waiting for me to stop resisting. That night, I told Maya I wasn't ready. She didn't push me. She just handed me a small black envelope and said, "When you are, burn it after." Inside was a stick of cedar incense, a match, and a slip of paper with a single word, "Release." I tucked it in my journal, unsure if I ever planned to use it, but deep down, I think something inside me already had. That night, I dreamed of the hospital again, not the real one, but a warped version of it. Long white corridors stained with shadows, flickering fluorescent lights that pulsed in sync with my breathing. I was standing outside a patient room, but the nameplate on the door was blank. Inside, I could hear crying, the same broken, rhythmic sobs. I opened the door slowly, expecting to see her, but the bed was empty. Only the heart monitor remained, flatlined, echoing a sound so loud it felt like it was coming from inside my ears. Then I heard movement under the bed, slow dragging, like something was turning over in its sleep. I tried to move, but I couldn't. Not in the dream, not in my body. That same paralysis set in, locking me to the floor as the figure rose from beneath the mattress, inch by inch, pale hands, long black hair, but the face wasn't hers. It had no mouth, just a long, open wound stretching from cheek to cheek, and the sound it made when it cried wasn't human. It was remembered pain, like it had learned sorrow by mimicking mine. I woke up screaming into the pillow, my body drenched in sweat, throat raw. The pendant had rolled across the room and landed under the window. The photo frame was gone, just gone. Not broken, not cracked, not shifted, gone. I ran outside, barefoot, into the dirt path leading to Maya's cabin, and when I banged on her door, she was already awake. She opened it with calm eyes like she'd been expecting me. "It's begun," she said quietly. "You opened the door last night, even if you didn't mean to." She pulled me inside, lit a lantern, and sat me down at her kitchen table. There was a fresh notebook already sitting there, untouched, waiting. She didn't ask questions. She didn't offer comfort. She just slid it toward me and said, "Write it now, before it finds her face again." That was the first time she'd said it out loud, that this thing wasn't just feeding anymore. It was transforming. And the more I avoided what I needed to say, the more familiar it would become. So I wrote the letter. I told my sister I was sorry for missing the signs, for pretending her depression was temporary, for canceling that phone call the week before she took her own life. I told her that I hated myself for not checking in more, for believing that she was strong enough to survive just because she always smiled through her pain. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the page was wrinkled and soft from tears. I didn't read it over. I didn't edit. I just folded it once, walked to the fire pit outside Maya's cabin, and burned it. The flame took fast. The paper curled and blackened until all that was left was smoke and ash and a strange, bitter smell that wasn't from the letter. It smelled wet, like soil turned by something alive. Maya stood behind me, silent. She didn't touch my shoulder or speak. She just watched the fire die, then whispered, "It knows now that you know." And I felt that, like something had turned to face me for the first time, like it was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Later that night, as I lay in the dark of the guest cabin, I didn't feel alone, not in the vague, haunted sense, not in the someone's watching way. This was heavier, closer, the kind of presence that makes the walls feel too tight, the air too thick. I gripped the pendant tightly and waited. The crying didn't come. This time, no weeping, no whispers, just silence and unnatural, stretching quiet that felt like it was listening. And then the bed dipped, slowly, like someone was sitting on it beside me. I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. I tried to move, but was locked in place. I could feel breath on my neck, slow, measured, perfectly in time with mine. And then a voice, not hers, not mine, but something else entirely spoke. You gave her peace. What will you give me? And just like that, I woke up, but the pressure on the mattress didn't lift. I turned my head and saw the imprint still there beside me, slowly fading into the sheets like it had just risen, like it had only stepped away for a moment, like it wasn't done yet. I didn't tell Maya about the voice right away. I needed to believe it was part of a dream, or the tail end of sleep paralysis, or maybe just my mind giving shape to grief I hadn't finished confronting. But the longer I stayed silent, the worse things got. The pendant stopped warming in my hand at night. It grew cold, instead so cold it left a pale imprint on my skin that wouldn't fade until morning. The bed started to creak at odd hours, even when I wasn't in it, and the crying, it returned, but now it echoed from inside the walls, not behind them, inside. It didn't sound like my sister anymore. It was lower, slower, filled with mock sympathy. It was pretending to mourn, but the sound rang hollow, like a choir that knew the notes but not the meaning. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just mimicking my grief, it was enjoying it, stretching it, making space to grow inside the wounds I'd only just begun to open. One night, I left the guest cabin and went straight to Maya's. I banged on the door harder than I meant to, my fist raw and trembling. She opened it slowly, already dressed, already alert. That should have been the first red flag. She hadn't been sleeping. It's asking for more. I told her it wants something else now. Her face didn't change. She just nodded and stepped aside, letting me in without a word. That's when I saw the photo on her table. It was burned along one edge, charred just enough to blur the face, but I recognized the shape, the curve of the shoulders, the outline of the chin. It was the same photo of my sister I had placed in the frame that vanished. Only now, it was older, weathered, used. When I asked her where she got it, Maya didn't lie. She just looked me dead in the eye and said, "It always brings something back." That's when it hit me this wasn't a ritual to get rid of the entity. It was a trade. Every guest brought sorrow, and every time, something was left behind for Maya to keep. I didn't leave. I should have, but I didn't. That's the part that still eats at me. I sat down across from her and asked, "What does it give you?" Her answer came quiet, barely a whisper. "Rest. For a while." That was the first time I saw the exhaustion in her face, not just physical, but spiritual. Like someone who hadn't truly slept in years and had made peace with borrowing others' peace for a few nights at a time. "We don't survive grief," she said. "We manage it, or it manages us." She wasn't evil. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was just surviving. But that didn't make it okay, and I think she knew that too. "It will ask again," she warned. "It always does. And if you answer honestly, it might leave you alone. But if you lie..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The silence said enough. I walked back to the cabin with a weight I hadn't felt before, not grief, not fear, debt. Something had touched my sorrow and now expected something in return. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I sat on the edge of the bed, pendant around my neck, let her ashes buried in the fire pit, trying to rehearse what I'd say when it came again. I thought if I had the words ready, if I could name what it wanted before it asked, I might get ahead of it. But grief isn't clean. It doesn't follow scripts. Around 3:17 a.m., the room went completely still. Even the trees outside seemed to stop moving. No wind, no creaks, just this dense, pressurized silence that made my ears pop. And then the crying started, not next to me this time, not under the bed, but inside the mattress itself, like it had folded itself into the foam, into the coils, into the very fabric I'd been lying on every night. And when I finally moved, when I finally gathered the courage to roll to my side and look down, I saw it not a face, just a long, pale hands pressed up into the top layer of the mattress from below, fingers trembling, reaching, waiting. That was the first time I left the cabin in the middle of the night and didn't return until sunrise. I sat on the forest path with a blanket wrapped around me, watching the trees shift in the dark. The crying stopped around 5 a.m., but the sound of it stayed in my head, repeating in loops. I kept hearing that same question from before. "What will you give me?" And I didn't know how to answer. Maya found me there, sitting against a tree, and handed me a cup of warm water. "You're close," she said. "Too close to stop now." But I didn't believe her anymore. I wasn't sure if she wanted me to finish healing, or if she just needed one more offering. I started wondering if the grief eater came for her once and never left. Maybe this place wasn't a sanctuary. Maybe it was a nest, and every guest was just a way to keep it from turning on her. I didn't say any of this. I just nodded and held the cup tight in my hands, trying to warm fingers that still felt like they'd been touched by something cold and ancient. And hungry, I tried to tell myself that it hadn't really touched me, that the weight on the bed, the voice, the hands pressing into the mattress, those were all symptoms: grief, sleep deprivation, the mind's reaction to silence and guilt. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't feel haunted. I felt watched, studied, like whatever this thing was. It had grown used to my shape, my routines, my scent. It was waiting for something, and the waiting was no longer passive. It had intent now, and that realization changed the way I moved. Through the cabin, I started checking corners, taping the closet shut, placing objects in a pattern on the floor so I'd know if something shifted while I slept. But that didn't stop it. If anything, it liked being noticed. The more I tried to block it out, the more precise it became. It wasn't random anymore. It was rehearsing, picking moments, learning when I blinked longest, when I was weakest. It was practicing timing. On the 7th night, the air changed. I noticed it as soon as the sun dipped below the trees. The warmth drained faster than usual, and the silence outside pressed harder against the cabin walls. Even the wood seemed tense, as if the structure itself knew something was coming. I lit every candle Maya had given me and moved them to the corners of the room, hoping the light would keep the shadows from reaching the bed. I didn't sleep right away. I just sat with the pendant in one hand and the photo Maya had returned to me in the other. I told myself I'd stay awake. I told myself I was strong enough to wait it out. But sometime after 2 a.m., I slipped, not into sleep, but into something else, a thick, slow wave of stillness that wrapped around my limbs like a wet sheet. I was frozen, not just physically but emotionally. I couldn't even be afraid. I could only feel. And what I felt was heat, damp, sharp breath against my cheek, and fingers, cold, jointless fingers brushing my thigh under the blanket. It took everything in me not to scream, not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My throat was locked tight. All I could do was watch, helpless, as the edge of the blanket lifted ever so slightly. Something dark, not a hand, not quite slid up from beneath the bed, not climbing, not crawling, just rising, like smoke thick enough to hold shape. And then a face, not hers, not mine, not even human in any recognizable way. Just a smooth stretch of skin where a mouth should be, to deep indentations where eyes might have once been. And it was weeping, silently, weeping without tears, without sound, like someone crying behind glass. It leaned in, close to my ear, and I heard my sister's voice, but cracked, disjointed, wrong. You forgot me, over and over, each repetition a little more warped, a little more gleeful, as if the accusation was no longer a wound, but a reward. I passed out before it could finish the sentence, or maybe I chose to. I don't know which is worse. When I woke, the candles were out, every one of them. The matches were soaked. My journal pages had been torn and laid in a spiral across the cabin floor, somehow precise, as if the thing had read them and arranged them like offerings. In the center of the spiral was my pendant, blackened, cracked, still warm to the touch. I ran to Maya's cabin, and this time I didn't knock. I just burst through the door, sobbing, shaking, screaming her name. She came down the stairs slowly, already dressed, holding a photo I didn't recognize. When I asked her what was happening, what it wanted from me, she didn't answer. She just placed the photo in my hands. It was me, not a recent picture, but one from when I was 15, sitting on the edge of my sister's hospital bed, head in my hands. I had no memory of it being taken. You gave it an image, she whispered. Now it wants the rest. I asked what that meant, but I already knew. It had a voice. It had a face. Now it wanted a body, and Maya was available. That night, I didn't return to the cabin. I stayed on Maya's floor, curled beneath blankets that didn't feel thick enough to keep the dark out. I didn't sleep. Neither did she. We sat in silence, listening to the woods press against the windows, to the creaks in the walls that didn't match the wind. It's not your fault, she said quietly at one point. None of it is. But that doesn't stop it from using your guilt like currency. I think she meant well, but the words didn't help, because deep down, I did blame myself, and the thing knew that. It had known from the start. The weeping wasn't random. The whispers weren't threats. They were memories, or worse, rehearsals of things I'd feared I might one day believe. That's how it worked. Not through horror, but through repetition. You hear a lie enough times, and grief will reshape it into truth. And now it had my voice, my words, my past. It had everything it needed to move beyond the bed, the mattress, the dreams, and I knew it was going to use it soon. By the time I realized the thing could follow me outside the cabin, it was already too late. The changes started small flickering lights. When I stepped near them, radios turning on with static. That sort of thing. But on the 9th day, something happened I couldn't explain away. I woke up to claw marks deep, splintering grooves carved into the wood paneling just above my bed, 4 of them, each about a foot long. Not random, not animal. They were perfectly parallel, like someone had dragged sharpened nails across the wall in one fluid motion. Maya saw them too. She touched the grooves with her fingertips and said nothing at first. Then finally, "It's not bound to the mattress anymore." She looked so tired I almost didn't ask what that meant. But I already knew. The grief eater was evolving. Or maybe I was just finally seeing what it really looked like when it stopped pretending to be a dream. Later that afternoon, the window in my room cracked. Not from wind, not from pressure, just this loud, clean snap that sounded like a whip in the air. When I ran to check, the glass had split down the center into a perfect Y shape like something had pressed a finger to the glass and let it grow out into directions. There were no stones nearby, no falling branches, just the glass, slowly, spider webbing outward. I stood there watching it for 5 minutes straight, and the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't random shattering. It was shaped like something. The branching cracks looked like bones then, finger-like bones pressed in the glass. I backed away and closed the curtain, but I felt it behind me, even before I heard anything. It was waiting, close enough now that I didn't even need to fall asleep for it to whisper. That night, as I drifted in and out of near sleep, I heard his voice through the walls, not in dreams, not from the corner, from inside my pillow, like it had finally learned how to breathe through things I thought were mine. Maya told me to prepare for a confrontation, not a banishment, not a ritual, just a night where I'd face it with no protection, no pendant, no crutches. It doesn't want to scare you anymore, she said. It wants your shape. The guilt already fits. She handed me a set of matches and a sealed envelope. If it gets too close, burn this. She didn't say what was in it, just told me to wait until the air turned sweet, like syrup rotting in your lungs. Then light the match and don't look away. I didn't ask questions. I was too tired to pretend I had any power in this anymore. That night, I laid in bed with the envelope resting on my chest. I didn't try to stay awake. I didn't fight the weight pressing down on my body. I just waited for that syrup smell, and when it came thick, cloying, like dead flowers soaking in vinegar, I lit the match and tore open the envelope. Inside was a piece of cloth, my sister's hospital bracelet, the one I thought they'd thrown away, the one I knew Maya couldn't have had. That was the moment it arrived in full, not in shadow, not in half-formed suggestion, but right in front of me. The bed didn't just sink, it bent, like something impossibly heavy had crouched on it. The thing that climbed from under the frame this time didn't mimic my sister. It mimicked me, my face, my breathing, my voice, stuttering through apologies I'd only ever thought, never spoken. You knew, it whispered in my voice, though. Its mouth never moved. You saw it coming and stayed quiet. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I could only watch as it leaned in, nose to nose with me, its skin pulling tight over a frame that wasn't quite human. Its eyes weren't eyes. They were mirrors, and when I looked into them, I didn't see my reflection. I saw my sister's room. The final day, the 4, the nurse turning her back, me stepping outside to take a phone call. I wasn't there when she died, and the thing knew that. It lived in that moment. I don't know how I did it, but I got my hand to close around the bracelet. My fingers burned when I touched it like it had been waiting for skin contact to unlock something. I held it to my chest and said one thing out loud, the first words. I'd spoken to the thing directly. You don't get to wear her. The moment I said it, the thing twitched, jerked, like it had been pulled upward by invisible strings. The mirrors in its eyes cracked, just a little, but it was enough. It recoiled, folding itself backward into the floor, the mattress, the frame, like it was being yanked back to wherever it came from. And for the first time, I saw it fear me, not because I was strong, but because I remembered the truth and claimed it before it could twist it again. The air snapped back into place, my breath returned, and I collapsed on the floor with the bracelet still in my hand. But I didn't feel relief, only dread, because now it knew I had strength, and things like that don't just leave when they're denied. They wait. I packed before the sun came up, I didn't care about folding clothes or checking drawers. I threw everything into my duffel in one motion and didn't stop moving. I didn't even tell Maya I was leaving. I couldn't, because part of me didn't trust her anymore, and the part that did was afraid she'd try to stop me. I walked down the path with the bracelet still in my pocket, the scent of burnt cedar still clinging to my clothes, and the constant crawling sensation on my back like invisible eyes refusing to blink. When I reached my car, the windshield was fogged on the inside. At first, I thought it was just the morning dew, but when I wiped it with my sleeve, I saw it. A handprint. Small, slender, perfectly placed on the passenger side glass. Not my sister's. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew. I got in anyway, started the engine, and drove like I was trying to outrun the part of me that still wanted to understand what had happened inside those walls. I stopped at a rest station. 3 hours later, hands numb from gripping the wheel too tightly, heart still kicking like it was being chased. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked in the mirror for the first time since the night before. My face looked the same, but my eyes didn't. They looked too wide, too hollow, like someone had scooped out the grief and left the shape behind. I don't even remember getting back on the road, just hours passing, towns blurring together, and the growing pressure in my chest that I hadn't really escaped anything, because something had changed. The air didn't feel lighter, my thoughts didn't feel clearer, they felt invaded, like my memories had been rewritten with fingers I didn't invite. I finally pulled over and called my brother, told him I needed to come home. He asked if I was okay, and I remember whispering, I think I brought something with me. I don't know if he heard that part. I don't think I meant to say it out loud. Back in the city, things weren't better. The sleep paralysis didn't return. Not exactly, but I still woke up every night at exactly 3:17 a.m. And always the same thing, a weight on the end of the bed, heavy but still, as if something was just sitting there, watching, not hostile, not active, just present, like it had found a comfortable place and didn't see the need to hide anymore. I went to a doctor. I lied about most of the details and said it was stress. They gave me sleeping pills. They didn't help. I tried to talk to a therapist. I lasted 2 sessions before I clammed up completely. How do you explain that you were haunted not by a ghost, but by the shape of your own sadness? By something that wore your dead sister's voice like a hand-me-down jacket? You just stop talking. You start surviving. That's all I've done since coming back. Not healing, not growing, just keeping still enough that whatever followed me doesn't feel the need to feed. I saw Maya once after that. She showed up at my apartment unannounced. No call, no message, just there, standing in the hallway with the same tired eyes and a bag over her shoulder. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't smile. She just looked me over and said, "It's still with you." I didn't answer. She nodded like she'd expected. The silence, then handed me a small notebook with a cracked leather cover. "In case it starts to speak in your voice again," she said, "write down what you remember. Keep the truth louder than the lie." Then she left, just like that. I haven't seen her since, but I read the notebook cover to cover. It's not blank. There are names inside, dozens of them, some pages burned at the edges, others scratched through. But all the entries follow a pattern. Each one ends with a short line in shaky handwriting. Still listening, still learning. That's when I realized this wasn't Maya's first time helping someone. It was her debt, same as mine. She hadn't cured me. She passed it on. The worst part is that no one believes anything's wrong. Not really. I go to work. I pay my rent. I smile in public. But I don't sleep. Not fully. Because I know what's waiting for me if I ever let go completely. I still hear the crying sometimes, not every night, but enough to know it hasn't gone far. I see reflections that move wrong. I hear footsteps behind me when I walk down long, hallways alone, and sometimes I wake up with my mouth open, not screaming, not gasping, just open, like something was using it for a while, like my voice has been loaned out and is being returned in pieces, and the thing is patient. It doesn't rush, it doesn't rage, it just waits, because grief doesn't die when you name it. It watches, it adapts, and sometimes when I look at my own hands too long, I see a flicker, not a shadow, not a blur, just a difference, a quiet reminder that once you've been heard by something like that, it never truly stops listening. When my Uncle David passed, it wasn't sudden. He'd been fading for a long time, years really, But the actual death still hit harder than I expected. Not because we were close. Exactly we weren't, but because of what he left me. An old, 3-bedroom house in southern Ohio, set back from the road behind thick hedgerows and oaks that hadn't been trimmed in decades. I hadn't even known he still owned it. I remembered visiting there once, maybe twice as a kid, but nothing stuck, except the image of a metal trunk in his study with weird stamps all over it. When the liar called, it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a problem, but I needed a reset. After my discharge, I couldn't sleep through the night without meds. I couldn't hold a job longer than 3 months. My apartment lease was ending, and the VA was dragging their feet again. So yeah, I took the house. I told myself I'd fix it up, flip it, maybe get a fresh start somewhere far away from everything that reminded me of what I'd survived. Looking back though, I should have known better the day I arrived. The house was colder than it had any right to be. Not the kind of cold you notice right away, more like a slow creep that clings to your bones and stays long after you've turned up the thermostat. The power was still connected, but the lights flickered every few minutes, like the house itself wasn't sure if it wanted to stay awake. I walked from room to room with a duffel slung over my shoulder and a knot in my gut I couldn't shake. The living room still had my uncle's threadbare recliner, the kind with duct tape on the arms, angled slightly away from the TV like he'd been talking to someone just out of frame. His bedroom door was locked. I didn't have the key. When I called the lawyer, she just said, "Some rooms stay shut until they're ready," whatever that meant. I should have been surprised when I found a framed photo on the hallway wall one I'd never seen before of him in uniform, surrounded by 6 other men. All of them were labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize, only till we're still alive. One of them was me, except I wasn't in that photo. I'd never met those men. I'll skip the boring stuff in packing, cleaning, fighting the spiders for space in the upstairs bathroom. But what I won't skip is the study. That room had a feeling to it, like the air was thicker there than anywhere else. The metal trunk I remembered was still there, right where I'd seen it as a kid, but it was closed tight with 3 rusted locks and no key in sight. On the desk were notebooks, dozens, each one dated and stacked in careful piles. When I opened the first one, it wasn't full of diary entries or war stories. It was transcripts, conversations, like interview logs, all from veterans. Some lines were blacked out, redacted like official military files. But what stood out was the repetition, phrases that came up over and over. They don't stop walking, and they stand still, and the most chilling one, they blink now. The longer I read, the more I realized these weren't notes. They were warnings. My uncle had seen something out there, something that followed him home, and he'd been tracking it for years. I should have known then this wasn't a house. It was a holding cell, and something inside was trying to move again. The second night in the house, I finally got into Uncle David's bedroom. The lock wasn't difficult, just old brass, rusted at the hinge. A flathead screwdriver and a few well-aimed taps were enough to pop it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old laundry and something else, something sour and metallic, like damp coins. His bed was unmade. Blankets slumped in the shape of a man who left in a hurry, but never came back. On the far side of the room, an oxygen tank stood upright beside a chair facing the window. The nozzle still had dried condensation around the tip, as if he'd been using it the night he died. I didn't find any photos of family, no keepsakes or medals, just a line of notebooks stacked against the wall, numbered from 1974 to 2021. Each was black, hardbound, identical, and taped to the front of the last one, scrawled in all caps, "Do not open after midnight." I picked it up anyway. I wasn't afraid yet. That came later. When I flipped through the 2021 notebook, the writing changed. The first few pages were neat, methodical, just like the others, tracking days, recording dreams, listing names of men I recognized from old military briefings. But halfway through, the structure fell apart. Sentences bled into each other. Paragraphs were scratched out and rewritten in the margins. On page 113, my name appeared in red ink, just my first name. No date, no explanation. The next page was blank, so was the next. Then, on 116, one line in my uncle's shaky hand. "He doesn't remember Kandahar." That's not right. I stared at that line for so long the words stopped making sense, because here's the thing: I was never deployed to Kandahar. My time was spent in the north, nowhere near his sector. But when I closed the notebook, A flash hit my mind like a buried landmine going off to late. A hospital tent, dirt floors, a man with a missing hand calling my name in my uncle's voice. I thought it was a dream, but now I wasn't sure it hadn't been something else reaching through. I kept finding items that didn't make sense. A drawer full of mismatched dog tags, none of which were his. A tape recorder with no tape, but when I pressed play, it clicked 3 times and hissed like it was trying to breathe. A wall calendar from 1986, still hanging, with 6 days circled in black marker, none of them with notes. Just thick spirals drawn over and over again until the paper nearly tore through. I took photos of everything and emailed them to a friend I knew from my old uni, someone with access to old personnel records. He called me 2 hours later, breathing heavy. "Don't ask me how I found this," he said, "but most of those names you sent, they were declared Mia. Some of them never even made it to combat, and one." He paused, then whispered, "One of those guys is you, with your service number, but dated 15 years before you enlisted." That's when it hit me. The thing Uncle David was tracking, it wasn't just haunting him. It was rewriting people, folding them into its story like old clothes tucked away in attic boxes. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, just like my uncle had. I listened, not for ghosts, not for footsteps, but for something else, something slower, heavier. Around 30 a.m., the house began to settle in ways I'd never heard before. Not the creaks of wood cooling after a long day, but deliberate movement, like someone barefoot was walking across the hallway just outside the door. I grabbed the notebook again, the one marked 2021, and flipped to the end. Nothing had been written since earlier, but when I turned to the inside of the back cover, something new was there. 5 words, fresh ink, no smudge. "Stop looking out the window." I turned my head slowly, heart kicking so hard I could barely breathe, and sure enough, through the glass, barely visible past the hedgerow, was a silhouette, still, tall, arms so long, head tilted in the exact way I remembered a fallen corporal, lying before they zipped the bag closed. And in that moment, I knew it wasn't just watching. It was remembering how to stand. At first, it was just the sounds, soft, dragging footsteps overhead in the middle of the night, always pacing in straight lines. I lived alone, and the attic had no floorboards, just exposed beams and insulation, so any step up there should have been impossible without crashing through. But the noise wasn't heavy enough to break anything. It was careful, deliberate, like someone who'd been taught to walk again and was practicing where no one could see. I told myself it was animals, maybe squirrels or raccoons. That lie worked until I heard it pause above my bed and match my breathing, inhale for inhale, exhale for exhale. It wasn't perfect. There was a half-second delay, like it was trying to copy me, but hadn't learned the rhythm quite yet. When I held my breath, it did too. That was the first time I felt truly outnumbered in my own home. Then came the voices. At 3:17 a.m. sharp, I started hearing them through the vent in the study. Not whispers, conversations, half-formed, overlapping, like a radio tune between the stations, both playing soldiers debriefings. I heard phrases I hadn't heard since deployment, call signs, field names, someone asking for a medevac on a line that was supposed to be dead, and always, beneath it all, a man repeating a single phrase in a voice that got clearer each night. "Still standing, still standing, still standing," over and over until the words blurred. The third night it happened, I slammed the vent shut with a book and tried to drown it out with music, but it didn't help. I could still feel it, like vibration under the floorboards, like the house itself was remembering things it shouldn't. I checked the notebooks again and saw the same phrase, circled in red. "If they remember how to stand, they'll remember." Why? That line hasn't left my mind since. I decided to stay awake and wait for whatever came next. I sat with the lights off, holding my uncle's flashlight and an old bayonet I'd taken off a wall display knob that I thought it would help, but holding something solid made me feel less like prey. Just past 2 a.m., the hallway light flickered on by itself. I watched its glow stretch across the floor, a dull orange glow that should have felt comforting, but instead made every shadow in the house seem to thick. And then the footsteps returned, not overhead this time, but down the hall, right outside my bedroom door. One step, then a pause, then 2 more, then a pause again, like someone relearning how to walk after injury. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The flashlight in my hand flickered, then shut off completely, and through the thin sliver beneath the door, I saw boots, Combat boots, laced the way our uni wore them, covered in dried red dust from a base I hadn't set foot on in over a decade. Except these boots were walking backward. I thought it might stop after that, like maybe whatever it was had finished its circuit and left me with a warning. But I was wrong, because the next morning, the boots were inside the room just sitting neatly at the foot of my bed, upright, laces untied, still dusty. I stared at them for a full 5 minutes, waiting for them to vanish like some leftover nightmare. But they didn't. When I picked them up, they were warm. Not like sunlight warm body warm, as if someone had just stepped out of them. I checked the door, the windows, every lock I could find. Nothing broken, no signs of entry, just the boots, waiting. And that night, when I checked the study again, the notebook had changed. A new page had appeared. This time, the handwriting wasn't my uncle's. It was mine, my blocky. All caps scrawled from my deployment logs. The entry read, "He got back up. I watched him breathe. He shouldn't have breathed." And next to it, in different handwriting entirely, "If you saw him breathe, he's still learning. And he remembers you." I started pulling old records, not just my uncle's, but anyone he mentioned in his notebooks. I used connections from my service, scouring obituaries, archived files, even restricted documents that weren't supposed to exist anymore. The deeper I went, the more wrong it got. Out of the 14 names he recorded most often, 9 were officially listed as Mia or KIA, but 5 of those had sightings reported long after their deaths. Not rumors, reports, civilian complaints, property damage logs, unexplained injuries. One man, Lieutenant Jason Hearns, was declared dead in 1982, but apparently visited his brother's farm in Idaho in 1993. The brother filed a police report saying Jason knocked on the door, didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there until the sun came up, then walked into the fields and disappeared. The police dismissed it as grief hallucination, but then another report surfaced from 4 years later. Same town, same description. This time the figure had a wound on its chest that bled, but never clotted. That's when I realized something. That made my stomach turn. These men weren't ghosts. They were unfinished, like memory files that kept trying to reload. Back at the house, I found a box of old tapes labeled procession attempts. At first, I thought they were old war logs, but when I played them, I heard something else. Rituals, soft chanting, in a mix of English and a language I couldn't place. My uncle's voice appeared often, calm and steady, directing someone else, sometimes alone, sometimes not. I only understood fragments. When the body fails, the mind must anchor, and they're not coming back unless we let them finish. There were mentions of coordinates, but they were written in a strange way, half in latitude, half in phrases like north of the third veil. I didn't know what that meant until I found a map folded into one of the notebooks. Not a military map, a hand-drawn one, overlaid with compass markings and bloodstains that hadn't faded. The center was marked with a single phrase, "March in place until memory returns." That was the moment I stopped thinking this was about ghosts. It was rehearsal. Something was trying to get back into the world, but only through men who'd been broken open first. I confronted the last surviving person from the photo I'd found in the hallway. Thomas Rowley, a medic turned recluse living upstate. I drove 6 hours and showed up at his cabin, half expecting to be turned away, but when he opened the door and saw me, he didn't look surprised. He just said, "You look like him." I didn't have to say who. He invited me in without a word. Inside, the walls were covered in photos of soldiers, none smiling, none blinking, all taken from strange angles over shoulders, behind windows, across crowded rooms. I told him about the noises, the voices, the way the notebooks wrote back. He didn't flinch, just poured the glasses of water, handed me one, and said, "They don't stay buried if you name them too loud. That's the rule." I asked him what they were. Really? He didn't answer right away. Then finally, in a voice like gravel breaking, "Not ghosts, not demons, just unfinished men. Men who didn't know they died, and someone's been helping them remember." I asked who. He looked straight at me. "Maybe it's you. Maybe. It was always supposed to be you." That's when I left. I didn't even take the water. Driving home, I kept checking my rearview mirror like something would be there, but nothing ever showed. It didn't have to, because I felt it settle into my bones the way cold does when you've stayed outside too long. You don't notice it at first, but when you sit still, it hurts. I had the sensation of being watched by memory, not a person, not a presence. Just the idea of someone who used to stand next to you, bleeding, breathing, now leaning behind your shoulder again like they'd never left. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was sleep deprived. But when I got home and opened the notebook again, the next page had been filled in, not by me, not by my uncle. In a slanted, almost childlike hand, it read, "One more learn how, one more stands, one more sees you," and at the bottom, smaller, "You keep bringing them home." That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the foot of the bed and listened to the floorboards breathe. The house didn't wait for night anymore. That was the first shift. Before, the footsteps and voices only came after dark, when I was half asleep and too tired to trust my own senses. But now, the activity bled into the day, subtle at first, like a photograph falling off a shelf or a door that wouldn't stay shut. But by the end of that week, it was undeniable. I'd be sitting in the kitchen eating stale cereal, and the study door would creak open on its own, always at the same time, 11:03 a.m. The clock above it would pause for exactly 13 seconds, then resume ticking like nothing happened. I tested it, timed it, filmed it. No matter what I did, it happened every single day. The weirdest part, when I played the footage back, I could hear faint static layered behind the ticking, like an old radio trying to find a signal. And if I cranked the volume, I'd catch a whisper, a man's voice, saying, "Report position," over and over. And sometimes, he'd say my name. The air in the house changed to heavier, like it resisted movement. I started having trouble with small things, closing windows, opening drawers, turning doorknobs. It wasn't me being weak. It was like the house had grown aware of my movements and was slowing me down on purpose. I'd walk into a room I'd just cleaned, and the books would be scattered across the floor again, open to pages where the margins were full of unfamiliar handwriting. The names from the old photos began showing up everywhere on sticky notes I hadn't written, etched into the wood under the dining room table, even scrawled in soap on the bathroom mirror. It was like the house had become a memory theater, staging scenes from lives that had never fully ended. And the problem was, I started recognizing their faces, not from photos, from dreams. Only the dreams were getting closer to waking. The first time one of them touched me, I was in the garage. I had found a false wall panel behind a shelf and discovered another notebook wedged in the crawl. Space, this one soaked in oil and dirt, the cover almost illegible. I pulled it out, and something cold brushed my wrist. Not a draft, not an animal, a hand. I know what a hand feels like. The pressure was soft, but intentional, like it was trying to warn me, not harm me. I jumped back, nearly tripping over a box of old tools, but when I looked behind the wall, there was nothing there, just darkness and dust. I opened the notebook. The pages inside were smeared with fingerprints too many to count, and at the center was a drawing. Charcoal, crude but powerful. A tall figure with no face, just the outline of a soldier's body, arms held in a T-shape, and underneath, the words. Now I remember standing. My hands shook as I closed it. For the first time, I started to believe this house wasn't haunted by spirits, but by the act of returning itself. It all came to a head 2 nights later. I just shut off the lights when I heard the floorboards outside my bedroom creak twice. Then a long pause. I froze. The pattern didn't repeat. Instead, something dragged across the floor. Not like a bag or a coat. Something heavy, wet, slow. I reached for my flashlight, but it wouldn't click on. My phone screen stayed black. The only light came from the moon spilling through the hallway window and in that pale wash. I saw him. One of them, not a shadow this time. A full figure, skin grayish like ash. Uniform ragged, with boots that didn't match. His mouth was moving, but no sound came out. Then his head jerked toward me too fast, like it hadn't practiced the movement enough. And I realized with a sick twist in my gut, he was trying to speak my name, like a baby mimicking its first word. Except this word belonged to someone who should have stayed dead. He took one step forward. I slammed the door, and as I backed away, something slid under the gap, a single dog tag, warm to the touch, stamped with my uncle's name and today's date. I thought about burning the notebooks, just stacking them in the yard and setting the whole collection on fire. But something stopped me, something I couldn't name, like the weight of memory itself had soaked into those pages. Instead, I spent the straight days going through each one line by line, hunting for patterns. My uncle hadn't just documented the manifestations, he'd experimented on them. Pages were filled with rituals, tests, even dialogues. He tried Latin, Hebrew, coded numbers, mirror placements, recordings played in reverse. Some of the notes were crossed out with sharp strokes, always labeled with failed in red. Others had small notations, 3 nights of silence or delayed breath, no blink. It wasn't spiritual, it was clinical. He wasn't trying to banish them, he was studying them. That realization hit hard. My uncle hadn't just been a victim, he had trained them or worse, taught them how to cross back over by turning memory into instruction. I found a ritual in a separate folder labeled Final Attempt, marked with duct tape and a burned corner. It involved creating a circle, with 6 objects each tied to the original unit in the photo I'd found weeks earlier. 2 of the items were dog tags I'd already located. Another was a photo, which I had from the hallway. The last 3 chalk numbers carved into floorboards, a voice recording on tape, and a soil sample taken from a grave took longer to find. The tape was hidden in a hollowed-out Bible. Behind the bookshelf, it played on a loop, the sound of breathing, then the words, "I'm still in position," over and over. I collected everything, arranged it in the study as described, then followed the instructions. Wait until 3:17 a.m., recite the names in a circle, burn the paper with the phrase only one should remember. I did it all exactly, as written, but instead of silence, the walls sighed. That's the only way I can describe it, like the house exhaled. The lights flickered, and the door to the study creaked open on its own, even though I had locked it from the inside. I stood completely still. On the floor in front of me, the notebook flipped open by itself. A blank page turned, and new writing appeared in that childlike scrawl I'd seen before. We followed orders. Now you give them. I slammed the book shut and backed away. My hands were shaking, my mouth dry, the air thick like steam, though nothing had changed. Then the boots in the hallway started moving again, only this time they weren't dragging. They were marching, heavy, in rhythm, echoing against the floorboards like a ceremony meant for no living witness. I grabbed them. Matches, set fire to the notebook, watched the flames lick the edges, blacken the pages and die out. The paper didn't even crumple. It refused to burn. That's when I understood. The notebooks didn't hold the memories. I did. All my reading, all my reliving, all my questioning had become part of the process. I hadn't stopped anything. I'd fed it. In a final act of desperation, I left the house, drove until my eyes blurred, stopping at a roadside church well. Past midnight, I stumbled inside and found an old priest locking up. I begged him for help, told him about the voices, the dreams, the bodies trying to move again. He looked at me like he'd heard it before, and maybe he had. He took me into a small room in the back, handed me a candle, and said, "If you lit the way in, you have to blow it out yourself." Then he left. I sat there for hours, whispering apologies to men I'd never met, praying names I didn't believe in anymore. Nothing changed. When I returned home, the house was dark, still, silent. No boots, no voices, no notebooks. Everything was gone like it had packed itself away. For a second, I thought I'd won. But as I walked into the bedroom, the mirror above the dresser showed my reflection standing to straight, to still. My mouth moved, but I wasn't talking. I don't even know what it said. I only know it smiled before I did. It's been 7 months since I left the house. I never went back. Not to grab clothes, not to check the mailbox, not even to lock the front door. I don't know if it's still standing. I don't want to know. I stayed in motels at first, then crashed on a friend's couch who owed me a favor from our time in service. I kept my head down, shaved my beard, changed phone numbers. I wanted to believe I could outrun whatever I let loose in there. For a while, I even managed to convince myself it had all been some kind of trauma response. A delayed breakdown from years of ignoring what I saw in the field. But deep down, I knew better. You can't explain away footprints that walk themselves, or notebooks that answer questions you never spoke out loud. You can't pretend the house doesn't breathe, especially when it was your voice on that last. Tape the one you never recorded, the one that ends with you saying, "Tell them I'm ready to stand." I still don't remember saying it, but it's my voice, clear as day. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I wake up in strange positions, arms stiff at my sides, jaw clenched so tight it aches for hours. I've started seeing people I don't recognize in places I know well, sitting at bus stops, with dirt-covered boots, standing in grocery aisles reading labels upside down, staring along at nothing, and always with the same posture. Shoulders squared, legs straight, chin slightly tilted. I catch them watching me sometimes, but they never move fast. That's what makes it worse. They move like they're remembering how to move. Like the muscle memory is still rebooting. And I swear, the longer I look, the more familiar their faces seem, like old photos I've stared at too long, blurring into something closer to home. I stopped taking pictures. I don't trust reflections anymore, especially not my own. I keep mirrors covered. I use my phone camera only for the most necessary things, because sometimes when I unlock the screen, the person looking back doesn't blink when I do. The worst part, I think I've started helping them, not on purpose, but I dream about names I've never heard, and when I wake up, they're written on scraps of paper by the bed. Sometimes I find boot prints on the floor, leading from my front door to the bathroom and nowhere else. I live on the 3rd floor. No balcony, no fire escape, just footprints and silence. One morning, I found a folded note under my pillow. 6 words. I didn't write them. I didn't need to. They were in my handwriting. It said, 3 remember, 3 more will stand. I don't know who they are, but I think I'll know soon, because the dreams are getting clearer. And in the last one, I stood shoulder to shoulder with 5 others, none of whom I'd ever met in life, but I recognized all of them from the notebooks. We were standing in formation, and someone behind me whispered, just one more, and we marched. Again. Then I woke up and found dirt on my boots that didn't match the local soil. That's not metaphor. I sent a sample to a lab. It came back marked as a match for a region in southern Afghanistan. If only I had listened to the warnings. The signs were all there. I should have known better, but I thought I was just trying to honor my uncle's memory. Instead, I opened a door that had been sealed by silence and locked with loss. And now the dead don't just walk, they remember. They remember who we were, where we lived, how we talked, how we moved, and I think they're getting closer to remembering why they stayed behind in the first place. Some part of them doesn't want rest. It wants repetition. Maybe that's how memory works. When it rots, it loops. And if you stand still long enough, if you don't blink, if you don't breathe too loud, you can still hear the rhythm right before it reaches your door, right before it remembers you. Last week, I saw a new name scratched into the inside of my closet door, fresh gouged in the wood. My name was there too, circled, and underneath, something recent. Next time, let us in. That's when it hit me. I was never haunted. I was recruited, and I think the mirror is starting to move. Before I do now, I moved into the house at the end of August, right before the semester started. It wasn't my first pick, far from it, actually, but I was late applying for housing, and everything nearby was either outrageously expensive or already packed, with loud undergrads who didn't care if you had a 7 a.m. lecture the next day. My professor recommended this place, said a former student of hers had stayed there years ago, called it quiet and perfect for anyone who wants to focus. That sounded good to me. I didn't need luxury. I just needed peace, a desk, and a bed. The house was tucked back from the road, behind a rusting black gate and a wall of overgrown hedges, 2 stories from the outside, but the attic had been converted into a 3rd-floor room with its own private stairwell. That's where I'd be staying. The landlady, Mrs. Delaney, was old and soft-spoken, and the only other tenant was a grad student named Roll, who rarely left his room. I figured I'd stumbled into the perfect spot until I realized my window didn't just look over the street. It looked directly into nothing, just blackness, like it was staring back. The first couple days were uneventful, even peaceful. The room was small, but cozy, with sloped ceilings and an antique dresser that creaked like it held secrets. I didn't bother bringing much, just a few books, my laptop, a lamp from home, and an old Polaroid of my sister and me at a counter fair that I kept on the nightstand. The walls were thick, and the house was quiet, so quiet, in fact, that I could hear the pipes groan every time someone turned on a faucet downstairs. My classes were heavy, but the solitude gave me space to breathe. Mrs. Delaney brought me warm banana bread on my second day and apologized for the smell in the stairwell, claiming the previous tenant had burned a lot of incense up there. I didn't ask questions. The air upstairs did have a kind of sweetness to it, but it was fading. Most nights, I worked late, then fell into bed exhausted. But starting the 3rd night, I began waking up same time, every time, 3:17 a.m. at first. I blamed nerves, stress, maybe even the creaky old bed springs, but it kept happening, and every time, the room felt just a little colder, and the shadows under the door looked just a little longer. By the end of my first week, waking at 3:17 a.m. had become less of an oddity and more of a routine. I tried everything: melatonin, white noise apps, even skipping dinner just to see if something I ate was messing with my sleep. But no matter what I did, I would jolt awake at exactly 3:17 every single night, without fail. No dreams, no sound. Just that strange sensation like I've been summoned from sleep by something I couldn't hear. At first, I'd just lie still, hoping to drift back off. But the stillness of the room never felt right. It was too heavy, not peaceful, not calming watchful, like the air itself was holding its breath. The window across from my bed, the one that should have shown the rooftops or street lamps, remained completely black. Even when I shined a flashlight into it, the beam never bounced back. It was like it absorbed the light, like it wanted to stay dark. And then, the fourth night, I noticed the shape, a silhouette, almost too faint to see, standing to the right of the window just outside its frame, where the light didn't quite reach. I blinked and it was gone. But that was the moment I started keeping the lights on when I slept. I convinced myself it was a trick of the eyes, shadows from a tree, maybe a weird corner in the old glass. But the next night, I left my phone set to record. I placed it on the desk, propped up toward the window. I thought I might catch something, maybe a car passing or a neighbor walking by. When I woke up at 3:17 again, I stared at the window like always. No movement, just that same thick darkness pressing against the glass. I made myself get up, check the hallway, the closet, even the crawl space in the wall. Nothing. Everything as it should be. But when I watched the recording the next morning, I felt ice rush through my chest. At 3:17 exactly, the footage flickered. The room darkened, even though the lamp beside my bed was on. Then, for a full 7 seconds, the screen showed me lying still in bed while something stood directly behind the camera. It didn't move, it didn't speak, but its outline was clear, a human shape, tall, and just slightly tilted as if leaning toward me. Then it vanished. My phone crashed immediately after, screen locked up, battery dead by 3:18. The next night, I tried sleeping downstairs on the couch just to break the pattern. Mrs. Delaney said nothing when she found me there in the morning, only offered me tea and said, "Some rooms take getting used to." That phrasing stuck with me. Some rooms. I asked her what she meant, but she just smiled thinly and asked if I'd seen the cardinal in the backyard. I hadn't. I never even looked. Everything in me wanted to move out, but I couldn't afford to. My scholarship barely covered food, and besides, part of me needed to know what was happening. I needed to prove it wasn't just stress, that I wasn't losing my mind. So I went back upstairs that night, phone charged, flashlight ready, every curtain drawn and door locked, but none of that mattered. At 3:17, I woke again, this time, not slowly, but with a start, as if someone had shouted my name without using their voice. My heart was racing, the lamp was off, my phone was dead, and in the corner of the room, just barely within the edge of my vision, something was sitting in the chair I never used. The chair in the corner had been empty for days, just a dusty, unused armchair with frayed seams and a deep cushion that swallowed sound when you sat in it. I'd never touched it, never had a reason to, but that night, when I woke at 3:17 once again, I felt something was wrong before I even opened my eyes. The air was thick again, heavier than ever, like the entire room was holding itself unnaturally still. And then I saw it, no movement, no sound, just a shape sitting where nothing should have been. At first, I thought I was imagining it, just a trick of the light and exhaustion. But the more I stared, the clearer it became. Shoulders, a head, angled ever so slightly downward, long arms resting across its lap in a posture too deliberate to be chance. My eyes adjusted slowly, painfully, as I forced myself to remain still. It was looking at me. I knew it, even though it never moved, even though I couldn't see its face. I felt the gaze like weight on my chest. It wasn't hiding. It was waiting. The second I blinked, it would know. So I stayed like that, locked in a silent war with whatever was across the room, terrified that if I moved first, the game would change. I must have blacked out, because I woke again around 7 a.m., light leaking through the curtain. The chair was empty. The lamp was back on. My phone still wouldn't power up, and my charger cable had been pulled from the wall. But that wasn't the worst of it. I noticed something had changed in the arrangement of the room, a small detail, but impossible to ignore once I saw it. My nightstand drawer was open by exactly 3 inches. I never leave it open. Inside, nothing was missing. Not the photo, not my notebook, not the key I kept hidden under the tape at the bottom. but something had been inside. The dust on the drawer rails had been pushed in, as if long fingers had rested there gently, careful not to make noise. That same day, I started hearing things on the stairwell, not footsteps, something slower, a kind of long, dragging shuffle, like fabric being pulled across the steps. I opened the door to check, but the stairwell was always empty. I even set up a mirror across from the landing to watch while I worked, but the mirror never showed what I heard. It only reflected something worse myself, standing slightly out of sync with my own movements whenever I turned around to fast. That weekend, Roll, the quiet grad student downstairs, knocked on my door for the first time. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Eyes sunken, shirt buttoned wrong, jaw twitching when he spoke. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said, "You're on the 3rd floor now, huh?" I nodded. He stared past me into the hallway. "Don't let it stand long in one spot. It starts to echo." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and muttered something about resonance and the window that doesn't. "Look out." Before I could press him, he walked away. That night, I left a recorder running real old school, just an audio cassette I'd picked up from a thrift shop. I left it next to the chair. When I played it back the next morning, the tape was full of static except for the last minute. There was a sound like deep breathing, then a slow whisper, not in English, not in anything I recognized. But after 3 seconds of silence, my name was spoken clearly, by my own voice, only I hadn't said a word. It took me a while to notice that it wasn't just watching anymore. The pattern changed. At first, it stayed near the window, as if drawn to the pane, then the chair, then the hallway. But it wasn't random. Every new spot it chose was somewhere I had stood the day before. I didn't put that together until I looked at a week's worth of notes I'd started keeping, same times, same positions. It was mirroring me, not copying like a reflection, but repeating my exact posture, my movements, with a delay. It was like whatever this was. It wasn't just there to scare me, it was studying me. And I started noticing other changes too. The way my books were stacked after I left the room, the way my toothbrush was dry before I used it. Even though I'd rinsed it, my boobs moved an inch closer to the wall each night. These weren't accidents. They were habits being rehearsed by something that was trying to move like me, live like me. I think it even practiced my breathing, because one night, I held my breath to see what would happen. From the corner of the room came a delay, just half a second delayed, a single sharp inhale that wasn't mine. I started doing little tests. I'd hum songs under my breath, random notes with no lyrics. The next night, faint echoes of the same tune would drift back to me from the stairwell. I'd leave objects in odd places, my watch inside a sock, my notebook under the radiator. They always returned to where they belonged by morning, placed with such quiet precision that it made my skin crawl. I don't think it understood why I did those things. It was just repeating, rebuilding a map of my life, moment by moment, mistake by mistake. I checked the mirror one night while brushing my teeth and caught myself blinking out of rhythm, my reflection lagging by a fraction of a second. I dropped the brush and backed out of the bathroom. When I returned, the mirror was fogged up. 3 words were written into the condensation: "Learning is watching." After that, I covered every reflective surface in the room with blankets. Even my laptop screen stayed off. It didn't matter. That night, I woke up to find the covers folded neatly at the foot of my bed, and the chair perfectly facing me, empty but warm to the touch. Roll wouldn't answer his door anymore. I could hear him pacing inside, muttering softly to himself. Once, I heard him whispering numbers, counting backwards from 1,000 in uneven bursts. When I knocked, he yelled, "Don't open it, it moves when you name it." I backed away, heart pounding. I hadn't said its name. I didn't think it had one, but I was beginning to understand the rules, or at least, what passed for rules. The figure in my room didn't chase. It didn't crawl or shriek or hover. It stood. It watched. And that was the horror of it. It didn't need to touch you. It just needed to remember you, piece by piece, until what stood across the room wasn't just copying your life, it was better at living it than you were. It knew your habits, your shortcuts, the way you always checked the lock twice, but never noticed the window latch was broken. It knew how long you stared at your phone screen before sleep, how many times you reread old messages. It knew how you hesitated before opening the closet, because it was there, every night, just a little closer than the one before. I made the decision to leave around 2 a.m. on a Thursday. I hadn't slept in 2 days, and my hands were starting to tremble without reason. The quiet inside the house had changed. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind of stillness that pressed against your skin, as if the air itself was trying to memorize you. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my duffel bag, stuffed in whatever I could, some clothes, my charger, my laptop, the Polaroid of my sister, and I didn't even bother zipping the bag shut. I was already halfway down the staircase when I heard it. Not footsteps, not a voice, just the gentle scrape of wood upstairs, a slow drag, like someone shifting their feet to stand. I froze at the bottom step, waiting, breath caught in my throat. The sound stopped. The hallway behind me was dark, but not empty. I knew it wasn't empty. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran out the front door without even telling Mrs. Delaney. The night was cold and sharp, but for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. I thought I'd made it out, but I didn't notice until I was halfway down the block that my phone had somehow already opened the Maps app and the destination was set to home. With the address of the house I just fled, I stayed in a cheap motel on the edge of town. Dingy yellow walls, buzzing fluorescent lights, a vending machine that ate quarters. It didn't matter. It was quiet, and I was alone. No house sounds, no late night breathing. I left the lights on and finally fell asleep. When I woke up at 3:17 a.m. because of course I did, the room was empty. No shadows, no movement, just the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I laughed a little, out of exhaustion, maybe relief. It was over. I was out. But when I rolled over to grab my bag, something was different. My things had been rearranged, not stolen, just reorganized. My shoes were placed side by side facing the door. My hoodie was draped across the chair, sleeves folded like arms, and the Polaroid of my sister, it had been moved to the nightstand, turned to face the bed. I hadn't done that. I checked my phone again. The lock screen had been changed. It was black now, with white text that read, "You left the room, not yourself." I threw the phone across the room, and it shattered against the wall, but the text was still there, glowing, flickering, repeating those same words over and over and over again. I rushed downstairs, barely dressed, trying to explain to the motel clerk that I needed another room, something farther from the third floor, farther from windows. She looked at me like I was crazy, but handed me keys to room 108. I locked the door, shoved a towel under the crack, and turned the mirror to face the wall. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the closet door, phone unplugged, lights all on. Just before dawn, there was a knock. Not loud, just a single tap. I held my breath. It came again, soft, deliberate, a pattern, maybe. I pressed my ear to the door, heart racing, trying not to shake. On the other side, someone whispered a question so quietly I couldn't catch the words. I leaned closer. That's when I heard my own voice say, "You left the chair empty. Let me sit." I didn't open the door. I waited until the sun rose, but the whisper stayed with me, even in the daylight, curling around my thoughts like smoke. That was when I understood. It wasn't trying to chase me. It didn't need to. It was wherever I went, because it wasn't bound to the house. It had learned the shape of me. The problem wasn't the third floor. The problem was who had stayed behind in it. I spent the next 2 weeks living in my car. I told people I dropped out for mental health reasons, which wasn't entirely a lie. I filed for academic leave and told my advisor I was going back home for a while. No one pushed back. No one asked questions. But I could tell by their tone that something felt off to them. A few of my classmates said they'd seen me around campus, not recently that day. One girl swore she saw me walking into the science building, backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones in, staring straight ahead. That might have meant nothing until she added that I didn't say hi when she called my name. Just looked at her with this blank, distant expression, like, "You didn't even recognize me," she said. I tried to laugh it off, said maybe she saw someone else. But that night, I found my student ID sitting on the passenger seat. I hadn't seen it in a week. I could have sworn I left it behind in that room on the third floor, but it was back, clean, unbent, with a small smear across the photo like someone had touched it with a damp fingertip. The strangest part was that no one ever called to ask where I'd gone. Mrs. Delaney didn't reach out. The bursar's office didn't follow up about my housing refund. Even Roll, who used to mutter through the walls, was quiet to quiet, out of fear or foolishness. I tried logging into the university portal just to check my file. What I found made my stomach turn. My account was still active. My login showed recent use. Even my course participation tracker had upgrades. I was still enrolled, still active. It listed class submissions I hadn't made and quizzes I hadn't taken. When I opened one of the recent submissions for a literature course, I nearly dropped my phone. The essay wasn't just well written, it was written in my voice, my sentence structure, my punctuation, the phrases I'd always used. But it talked about a book I never read. The closing paragraph mentioned solitude as a shape that fills the room when nothing else is watching. That line hit me so hard I had to sit down. I never wrote those words, but somehow I had, and someone had signed it with my name. By the end of the month, I'd started hearing from old friends texts, mostly casual at first. "Hey, weird running into you last week. Didn't know you were still around." One of them even thanked me for helping with the group project, which I had obviously not been a part of. I asked them what I said, where I was, but the details were always fuzzy. "You seem kinda out of it," one said. "Quiet, but focused." Focused. That's the same word the campus therapist used back when I tried to explain my sleep issues. She said I had a focused stress pattern, but I don't think that's what they mean now. I think whoever or whatever took my place knows just enough to pass, to blend in, not fully, but enough to be close, and with each passing day, people forget who I really was. They see something familiar and accept it, because that's easier than asking what's wrong. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to stay still, say little, keep watching, and little by little, the real you disappears, replaced by a version that never blinks too fast, never speaks unless spoken to, and never forgets a routine. Once it's seen it done, it had been 3 months since I left. I moved across the state, changed my number, even got a new laptop. I stopped logging into university accounts. I ghosted old classmates. I told myself I was starting over, that whatever had been in that house couldn't follow me here, that I was safe as long as I didn't talk about it, didn't think about it too much, didn't look back. But then I started waking up at 3:17 again, just once or twice, then more, and with it came that old heaviness in the air. I told myself it was coincidence, but the dreams returned next: the hallway, the chair, the window that showed nothing at all. I could feel eyes watching me from places where there were no people. I started seeing myself in crowds, not just glimpses, clear reflections. A man at the bus stop with my exact jacket and walk, moving like he'd studied me for years. A figure leaving the same coffee shop I was about to enter, phone in hand. Same lock screen photo, my sister and me at the fair. He looked right at me and smiled. But it wasn't my smile. It was just a little to even, to still, to perfect. That same night, I returned to my apartment and found a padded envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name, handwritten in block letters. Inside was a single out of my old Polaroid, the original. I knew because the bottom right corner had a faded water stain from the time it fell in my bathroom sink sophomore year. I left it behind. I was sure I had, but now it was back, and someone had written on the back of it in what looked like charcoal, "Thank you for the room. It remembers you well." I threw it out. I burned it, actually. Took it to a fire pit at a local park and watched it curl to ash. That should have been the end. But just last week, I woke up with something clenched in my hand tight enough to leave marks in my skin. It was the key, the old brass key to the third-floor bedroom. I hadn't seen it in months. I'd never even taken it with me, but somehow it had found its way back, sitting in my palm like it belonged there all along. That was the first time I felt truly scared again, not because it had returned, but because part of me wanted to go back. So now, every night, I check the corners of the room before I sleep. I cover the mirrors. I unplug every device, but I know it's not enough, because something still stirs at 3:17. Not loudly, just a soft shift, like a chair moving ever so slightly across the floorboards of a place. I haven't set foot in since fall. It doesn't need the house, not anymore. It has the habits, the voice, the smile. It's still learning, still perfecting the way I laugh, the way I breathe when I'm nervous, the exact sound of my footfall when I climb stairs two at a time. And tonight, when I looked in the mirror before taping it over, I swear just for a second I saw myself, blink first. Not the reflection, me, as if whatever was standing there had been waiting, patiently, for the moment I'd forget which one of us left the light on that night, and which one of us never left at all. I know how ridiculous this sounds. Honestly, if I were hearing this from someone else, I'd probably nod politely and move on. thinking they were either delusional or desperate for attention. But I'm telling you this as plainly as I can because I've got no one left to tell it to. No one who believes me. And if you're listening right now, all I ask is that you keep your bedroom door locked tonight. I made the mistake of not taking sleep seriously until it started taking things from me. It started 2 years ago when I volunteered for a long-term sleep study at a private research center just outside Philadelphia. I was broke, anxious, barely sleeping anyway, and saw an ad on a Reddit thread offering compensation for volunteers with chronic sleep paralysis. It sounded sketchy, sure, but they offered $3,000 just for 2 weeks. At the time, that might as well have been a winning lottery ticket. The place was called Somnolucid Institute, and it looked more like a converted high school than a medical center. Peeling linoleum floors, flickering fluorescence, and the smell of old plastic in every hallway. But the people running it were oddly friendly, really, like they'd been waiting for us. There were 7 of us in total, all with some form of recurring sleep paralysis. We were a strange bunch, a school teacher from Maryland, a twitchy kid who kept asking about REM patterns, a woman who said she hadn't had a dream in years, and a guy named Mal who snored like a truck when he was awake and spoke in whispers when he wasn't. I was the youngest and probably the least interesting, but no one judged. That was the weird part. No one asked questions. It was like we all knew we'd signed up for something that couldn't be explained in polite conversation. The group felt close, immediately too close, as if we already shared something long before meeting each other in that peeling, quiet building. They assigned each of us our own room. Standard procedure, they said, single bed, cameras mounted in the corners, motion sensors in the sheets, and a complicated headset that monitored brainwave patterns during REM cycles. We were told not to remove the devices under any circumstances once recording began. They even made us sign off on that rule twice. Each room had thick blackout curtains, sound dampening foam along the ceiling, and this constant low frequency hum that they claimed helped induce lucid paralysis events. I remember laughing at the phrase when I first heard it. It sounded like some fancy way to make being trapped in your own body seem like an adventure. It wasn't, but I'd signed the forms, taken the check, and committed myself to 2 weeks of monitored nights and early morning debriefings. They kept saying it was for the study, like that explained everything. Looking back now, I don't think any of us were the subjects. I think we were the bait by the third night. Most of us had experienced at least one recorded episode. We gather in the cafeteria every morning, wrapped in identical gray hoodies with the Institute's logo stitched over the chest, trading stories over cheap coffee and dry bagels. But something shifted around night 4. Mal came in late to breakfast and wouldn't sit with the rest of us. He kept rubbing the side of his neck and muttering that he'd heard a voice stack, whatever that meant. I didn't press him on it. But later that day I overheard him whispering to himself in his room. During a break, he kept saying, they're sensing. I shouldn't have joined. I thought he was just tired or off his meds or whatever excuse we all lean on. When things got too strange to process, but then to others started hearing it to a kind of chanting during paralysis. Distant at first, soft, like a lullaby sung by people you never see. At first, I didn't hear anything during my episodes. Just the usual paralysis, the frozen limbs, the thundering heart, the unbearable sense that someone's in the room watching without breathing. But eventually, around night 6, I started picking up the sounds too. It began like a vibration behind my ears, as if someone was humming through the walls. Then came the voices, layered, low, and painfully slow. They didn't speak in words, not at first. It was more like tones stacked together into a harmony that shouldn't have existed in this world. That's the best I can describe it. A choir of tones too deep and too patient to be human. When I told the staff about it the next morning, they said the sound might be involuntary dream harmonics, another clinical label to explain something they clearly weren't surprised to hear. But one of them slipped up, a guy named Brennan. He said, they're not supposed to get that closed this early. He froze when I asked what he meant, then just shook his head and walked away. I never saw him again after that. We were told not to talk about the voices outside of morning debriefs, but of course we did. Late night whispers in the halls, little notes slipped under each other's doors. Some of the others were convinced it was shared dream activity, like a group hallucination that had somehow aligned through our sense brainwaves. But I knew better. These voices weren't in our heads, they were outside the frame. They moved around the room while I was frozen. I could hear their bare feet brushing against the floor. I could feel their breath on my cheek. I started recognizing their rhythm. They always came in threes, 3 sets of steps, 3 harmonizing tones, 3 shadows standing just outside the camera's range, and every night they got closer, not louder, closer. I stopped sleeping around night 9, just stayed awake staring at the corner where I knew they waited. I wasn't alone either. One of the other participants, a woman named Claire, started sleeping with her face wrapped in a scarf. She said she didn't want them to see her mouth. When I asked what that meant, she just laughed and said, "They don't sing when you smile." I still don't know what that means, but it haunts me. Everything about that place haunts me. And now, even though I left, I still hear them. Not every night, but enough to know they haven't forgotten me. Enough to know they're not finished yet. By the start of the second week, they introduced what they called phase to conditioning. We were no longer just subjects. We were observers of rhythmic phenomena, whatever that meant. They gave us new instructions, stricter ones, some of them bizarre. We were told to fall asleep facing the door, no exceptions. Anyone caught turning away from the room's entrance would have their participation temporarily suspended. We had to keep our eyes open as long as possible during the paralysis events, and if we could move our eyes, we were to track any visible motion and refrain from direct eye contact. Those phrases stuck with me. What kind of sleep study tells you to watch the movement in the corners of your room, but never to look it directly in the face? Every room was outfitted with a small, rectangular box mounted above the bed about the size of a showbox, with 3 blinking red lights. They said it was a visual calibration device meant to create ambient consistency for the subjects. But I noticed something off. The lights only blinked in 1 of 2 sequences, short, short, long, or long, long, short. One of the texts slipped that the patterns were connected to the entity clustering index, a term that didn't appear in any of the paperwork we'd signed. I looked it up that night using the staff's public Wi-Fi, and nothing came up, nothing at all. Like it didn't exist outside those walls. That's when I started writing everything down. Every dream, every sound, every shift in the lights or cold patches in the room. I started to see patterns forming, and not just in my own records. The others noticed too. Mal, who at first seemed like the least stable of us, began scribbling diagrams in the margins of the study journals they gave us. Lines connecting, lights, to sounds, to footsteps, to changes in our sleep graphs. He told me the tones were measured, that each chant, each harmony we heard, was built from something more than just noise. He believed they were communicating, counting. Even, he said the 3 voices were marking time. 3 chants means they're nearby. 2, they're far. 1, they're underneath you. I didn't want to believe him. But then I had an episode where I heard only 1 voice, just one, low and guttural, almost like it was humming directly into my spine. I woke up choking, drenched in sweat. The sheets twisted like something had coiled around me. I didn't sleep the next night. I sat up with the lights on and listened for that single tone. It never came, but I kept hearing a slow creaking, like someone rocking back and forth just outside the door. The rules kept evolving, becoming harder to follow and more personal. We weren't supposed to sleep during the day, even accidentally. They started monitoring our eyelids with adhesive pulse readers, and anyone who dozed off outside the nightly window got pulled aside for what they called adjustment sessions. We never saw what happened in those rooms. They were locked, soundproofed. When people came back, they looked paler, hollow-eyed, like something had been taken and never returned. I asked Claire about it once, and she just said, "They show you what you look like from the other side." Then she walked away, shivering, her scarf pulled tighter around her face. These weren't just clinical rules anymore. They felt like rituals, like steps in a dance meant to welcome something inside. That was also when they gave us the code word sheets, 8 printed cards, each with 3-letter phrases written in bold caps. We were told to choose one and memorize it. If at any point during an episode we became conscious but immobilized, we were to repeat the code word internally as a way to anchor awareness. No one explained what would happen if we didn't remember the code. Mine was how. I thought it was a joke at first, some 2001, a Space Odyssey reference. But Mal's was 1, and Claire's was TYR. The words didn't sound random. They sounded assigned. And the night I forgot mine, that was the first time I heard them chant my name. Not a scream, not a whisper, just a low, dragging pronunciation that turned my name into something wet and unrecognizable, like they'd been practicing how to say it from inside a well. We were told not to make direct contact with the other participants during paralysis episodes. Even if we thought we saw them, That rule chilled me. I'd never even considered that one of us might show up in someone else's room. But Mal claimed he'd seen me standing at the foot of his bed one night, completely still, eyes wide open but unblinking. I laughed it off at the time, but when I asked what I was doing, he said, "You were humming the tune, but your mouth wasn't moving." I tried to laugh again, but it came out cracked. That night I dreamt I was in someone else's bed, watching from above as a man struggled against invisible hands, and when he turned his head toward me, he had my face, frozen in the same mask of terror I'd worn dozens of times before. The rules weren't helping anymore. They were invitations, and we had accepted them, whether we meant to or not. We created a bridge, one that didn't need to be walked across. It just needed to be heard. And night by night, tone by tone, it was getting louder. They were getting closer, and one of us was already gone. We just didn't know who yet. It was 9/11 when I finally broke into full participation, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. That night, I followed the protocols to the letter. I kept my head facing the door, let the headset record my brainwaves, and repeated the word howl like it might protect me. But when sleep took hold, it wasn't like drifting off. It felt like sinking, like something had grabbed my ankles and pulled me down into a deeper layer of consciousness I didn't know existed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink, but my mind was fully awake. That's when I heard them, not in the distance, not muffled. In the room, standing beside me, voices stacked in eerie and human harmony, 3 distinct tones, like a chorus with no language. One voice hovered near my ear, one at my feet, and the third somewhere above my head. Their chant felt wet, like the syllables were made of breath that had been soaking in cold water. I could feel the words brush against my face as they moved, in an unbroken loop. The lights from the calibration box blinked in the long short pattern I'd come to dread, casting soft red halos on the ceiling. That pattern, I learned from Mal's notes, meant they are gathered, and I knew deep in my chest that they weren't just gathered near me. They were gathered for me. The fear didn't spike like I expected it to. It settled slowly, like a heavy coat being laid over my chest. I couldn't move under it, could barely breathe, but I saw things, shapes moving beyond the veil of my peripheral vision, elongated arms, heads that tilted to far without snapping, fingers tapping the rhythm of their chant along the mattress frame. They were studying me, and not for the first time. It felt like I had become a rehearsal space for something ancient, and I wasn't just being observed. I was being tuned, like an instrument made of flesh and nerves. When I finally woke, gasping and sobbing into a pillow I didn't remember grabbing, the corner of the room was still dark. Too dark. I scrambled for the light switch, hands shaking, so hard I nearly knocked the lamp off the table. When the bulb lit the room, I saw a trail of small, wet footprints leading from the edge of the bed to the door, too small to be an adult's. Bare feet, toes splayed, puddled like they'd stepped out of a river. I called for one of the staff, but no one came. Eventually, I stumbled out into the hall, but the main corridor was empty. No nurses, no guards, not even another participant. I walked past Mal's door and noticed his observation light was off. That was strange. The lights were always supposed to stay on when recording. I knocked, got no answer, and finally returned to my room, locking the door behind me even though I knew a lock meant nothing to the things I'd seen that night. The next morning, 4 of us showed up for debrief. Out of 7, Mal was gone. So was Claire. So was the quiet guy from Missouri who never gave his name, but always brought peanut butter crackers to breakfast. When I asked where they were, one of the staff, an older woman with a twisted mouth and glazed over eyes, simply said, "They've completed their participation." She said it like it was a graduation, like we should be proud. I nearly choked on my coffee. One of the other participants, a woman named Eloise, leaned in and whispered, "They don't leave, they fade." That phrase made my skin crawl. I asked her what she meant, but she just stared at her tray, pressing her plastic fork into her scrambled eggs, like she was trying to draw something underneath them. I realized then that we were all just pretending to be okay. None of us were. Not really. We were going through the motions to avoid being next, or maybe to deserve being next. That night, I refused the headset. I told them I was sick, migraine, fever, whatever lie I could come up with to stall the session. They didn't argue. They just handed me a single white pill and said, "For the noise." I didn't take it. I flushed it the second they left. But the thing is, the noise came anyway, even without the equipment, even with the lights on. I heard the chant, This time, though, there were more voices, not just 3, 5, maybe 6, harmonies folding into each other in ways I didn't think were possible for the human ear to perceive, and beneath all of them, layered like a bass line carved from a screen, was something trying to pronounce my name again, not just copy it, become it. The vowels sounded deeper, the syllables slower, like something was shaping its tongue to fit inside my sound. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just laid there, waiting for the door to creak open or the lights to blink back into their horrible rhythm. They never did, but I felt watched the entire time. Not by one of them, by all of them. We were past the point of pretending this was science. The rules didn't protect us anymore. They marked us, prepared us. Each of us had given something up without realizing it. Maybe a thought, a memory, a sound, and in return, something had stepped closer. I don't know what they want, but I know they sing in unison, and I know that every night, their choir sounds more like us. By night 12, I stopped trusting faces. There was something wrong with the way people moved, too measured, too smooth. I'd sit at breakfast and watch them stir their coffee with the exact same rhythm, the same wrist motion, the same pause before sipping. At first, I thought I was just seeing patterns, because I wanted to see them, that maybe sleep deprivation had sharpened my paranoia into a blade. But then Eloise asked me a question that knocked the wind out of me. She leaned in and whispered, "Do you remember blinking yesterday?" I started to laugh but stopped. I couldn't. I had no memory of blinking, and once that thought took hold, I couldn't let it go. I began studying the others, and what I saw chilled me. Unbroken stares, eyes that seemed just slightly too wide, and most of all, a stillness between movements that didn't feel natural, not like humans pausing, more like something calculating what to do next. That morning, the cafeteria was nearly empty again. Only 3 of us showed up, me, Eloise, and a man I hadn't spoken to before. His name tag said Jason, but I was almost sure that wasn't who he'd been on day one. I remembered his build, being different, his voice deeper. Now, his skin looked pale, almost stretched, like it had been pressed tight across his jaw. He kept humming while eating, just low enough that it felt like a mistake, but never stopped. Eloise and I sat across from each other in silence, our trays untouched. When I asked her where the others were, she just whispered, "Gone to join the choir." Then she slowly pushed her tray away and walked out without another word. I followed her to her room a few minutes later, but when I knocked, there was no answer. The light above her door was off. I peeked through the crack beneath the frame and saw nothing but darkness. It was like the room didn't exist anymore. That night, I tried to document what I saw. I scribbled in the journal they gave me until my fingers cramped, trying to describe the shift in the way people moved, the way they breathed. I wrote that Mal hadn't disappeared, he'd been replaced. I started to believe that maybe these voices didn't just chant and mimic, maybe they inhabited. And if that was true, then someone or something was testing how well it could wear us. I remembered the rule: never make eye contact during paralysis. Maybe it wasn't just about protection. Maybe it was to keep us from being copied. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how many details I'd started to forget. What day it was, what time I last slept, whether I dreamed it or lived it. The line had blurred completely. Around midnight, I decided to break the routine. I unplugged the recording device. I turned off the headset and the lights. I wanted to see what would happen without that controlled environment guiding it. I laid on the bed, not even pretending to sleep, and waited. For hours, I stared at the ceiling. At some point, I don't remember, when I lost consciousness, it wasn't like falling asleep. It was like being pulled through the bed. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my room. I was standing at the edge of the hallway, watching myself sleep through the door's tiny window. My own body was stiff, arms at my sides, face slack, but still awake. I could see my eyes move beneath the lids, twitching in rhythm with a sound I couldn't hear from where I stood. But I felt it, a pull, a vibration in the walls like distant thunder. And then I saw them, 3 figures standing outside the other rooms, peering in, perfectly still, all of them humming in unison. Then one of them turned to face me. It had my face. I woke up on the floor, clothes soaked in sweat, my cheeks stuck to the cold linoleum tile. The bed was empty, the headset unplugged, just as I left it. But on the mirror above the desk, written in condensation, was a phrase I didn't remember writing. "You are the last one." I stood there for 10 minutes just staring at it, waiting for the letters to fade. They didn't. They stayed until I wiped them away with a shaking hand. That morning, there was no breakfast, The cafeteria was dark, chairs stacked, the overhead, lights buzzing but unlit. I wandered the halls, calling out, knocking on doors, nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no humming. It was as if the place had been cleared out overnight. The way a stage is emptied after the final performance. Only no one had told me the curtain had dropped. I wasn't just alone. I was left behind. I don't think I was meant to be. I don't think I'm alone now, either. The ones who stared along without blinking, they're still here, just quieter now, just better at pretending. But I know the difference, and I know what waits if I stop watching. I know how it sounds when it sings in a voice that's almost mine. And every night, I hear it closer breathing, humming, learning. Soon, I think it'll get it right. It was around the 13th night when I finally understood the truth, or at least enough of it to stop pretending I could fix any of this. I'd gone to bed again with every light on, my back to the wall, and a flashlight clutched in one hand, like it might do something more than cast shadows on the ones already circling me. I had started hearing the chanting before I even closed my eyes now. It was leaking into the day, showing up in moments of silence like a background hum only I could detect. And worse, it had started changing. The rhythm wasn't just noise anymore. There were breaks, spaces, rests between the tones like breathing. And when the voices layered together, they didn't just hum, they began to speak. Not in English, not in anything I recognized, but it carried intention and meaning and weight, enough to make my skin prickle when I listened along. That night, I heard my name again, only it wasn't quite my name. It was stretched, flattened, broken apart, and reassembled in a way that sounded like someone trying to remember how to say it, rather than repeat it. The vowels were too long. The consonants trailed like dripping ink. But what chilled me most was that I recognized the voice, not one of the unknown chants, mine, my own voice, mimicking itself through the mouth of something else. I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright for hours, listening to my own voice hum lullabies I'd never sung, whisper phrases I didn't know, echo from places in the room I hadn't touched. When I finally stood up to pace the floor, I noticed something, scrawled faintly on the inside of the lampshade, written in fine, red ink. You are remembering wrong. I don't remember writing it, but the handwriting was mine. I confronted the remaining staff that morning, or tried to, but something had changed about them too. Their uniforms were the same, their smiles unchanged, but their eyes had gone quiet, not blank, not hostile, just quiet, like they were no longer receiving input from behind. I kept asking where the others had gone, what the point of the study was, what exactly we were being exposed to. The man at the desk someone I'd seen nearly every day just said, "You moved past the measurable phase." When I asked what that meant, he turned his head slightly, too far for comfort, and said, "You don't measure sound after it becomes language. You listen." Then he blinked once, very slowly, and I noticed he didn't blink again for the entire conversation. I left that room with my pulse racing and a cold certainty in my chest. This place wasn't designed to fix us. It was built to break us open, like tuning forks lined up to sing one clear note back at something waiting to be heard. Later that evening, I went looking for Eloise. Her room was unlocked. The door barely cracked open. I hesitated, then pushed. It opened fully and froze. The bed was gone. The desk was still there, but the mattress had been stripped away, and the floor beneath it had been carved with dozens of overlapping rings, concentric circles, scratched deep into the tile. In the center, in perfectly straight lettering, was a message. I let them in when I couldn't remember who I was. The closet door was slightly ajar, and inside it, hanging neatly on the back wall, were 3 gray staff uniforms. None of them had name tags. None of them were dusty. They looked recently worn. I stood there staring at them, a chill rising in my back, realizing that maybe the choir didn't kill the others. Maybe it just wore them. Maybe that was all it needed to. Be invited in by someone to broken to know what they were handing over. That's when I started to wonder how many of the people I'd spoken to in the past few days had really been part of the original group. How many were just echoes now, filling space with programmed responses and hollowed-out routines. I started retracing conversations in my head and noticed the repetition phrases I'd heard more than once, from different mouths, responses too similar to be coincidence. It wasn't just the staff, it was the others too. There was a rhythm to the way they interacted, a choral structure hidden in their small talk. Everything came in threes, 3 steps into a room, 3 seconds of silence before answering a question, 3 phrases repeated from person to person. You look tired. Did you sleep at all? They're learning to hum. I used to think we were the subjects of an experiment, but now I was sure of something far worse. We were instruments, and the tuning was nearly complete. That night, I barricaded my door. Not with furniture, it wasn't that kind of fear. It was symbolic. I rearranged every object in the room so that nothing sat in threes. I removed the sheets, turned the mirror to face the wall, and set the light to flicker irregularly. Anything to interrupt the harmony, anything to confuse the choir. And for the first time in 2 weeks, the voices didn't come, but I heard movement slow and deliberate on the other side of the door. Not pacing, swaying, as if something on the other side was keeping time to a silent rhythm I had momentarily disrupted. I didn't sleep that night either, but I didn't dream, and I didn't hear my name. That was enough to give me hope for now. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up. It wasn't natural. There was no easing into it, no moment of soft transition from dream to reality. It was more like being dropped, slammed back into my body with a sickening jolt. Every muscle stiff with tension I couldn't explain. The lights in my room were out, which was impossible because I left them on. Always. I sat up fast, heart pounding, and the moment I did, I realized the hum was gone. The constant low sound that had filled the facility since day one silent. In its absence, I heard something else, something worse, a rhythmic tapping, not on my door, under my floor. It was moving, fast, from one end of the room to the other, and back again, as if pacing beneath the tile. I threw on my shoes, grabbed my journal, and unlatched the door but didn't open it. I listened first. Always listen. That's what Eloise had said, and what I heard made my blood run cold. The chant was back, not humming, not tonal, speaking my name in multiple voices from both ends of the hallway. I knew that I wasn't supposed to wake up. Not yet. I wasn't meant to feel this part. Whatever had been waiting was finally ready to finish the transition, and I was resisting it. I pulled the door open and crept into the hall, every step feeling like a mistake. The overhead lights flickering in uneven pulses that made the shadows strobe across the walls. No alarms, no voices, just that chanting, steady and growing closer, and an awful dragging sound like something wet being pulled across concrete. I turned the corner and froze. There were figures down the hall, more than 3, 7 maybe, all standing shoulder to shoulder, facing my direction, heads slightly tilted like dolls pulled from the same mold. They didn't move at first, just watched. But I knew they could see me. I felt it in my skin. And then, one by one, they began to sway synchronized, left to right, their chant never breaking. I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted past the common rooms, past the empty cafeteria, through the admin hallway. Every door I passed was open now, wide open, and each one had the exact same thing inside: an empty bed, a cracked mirror, and in the center of every floor, a perfect ring drawn in what looked like salt or ash. Each room had a faint humming coming from within, the sound so close to human it hurt to hear. I didn't stop. I couldn't. I reached the stairwell at the north end of the building and started down, but halfway through the second flight, the lights above me shattered. Glass rained down, stinging my neck and arms, and from above I heard a single voice, clear, sharp, and wrong in every way, return to tone. It didn't sound angry. It sounded disappointed, like I had failed an audition. I kept going. My legs ached, but I didn't slow. I knew that if I stopped, even for a second, they'd find a way inside me, through my breath, through my voice, through whatever part of me still resonated with their rhythm. The lower levels of the building were darker than I remember, dirtier, too, like no one had walked those halls in years. I passed old storage rooms filled with broken chairs and dusty cables, flickering signs that still read authorized personnel only. I had no plan, no map, just a direction away. But I started noticing something that made my chest tighten. The hum had returned, not from above, but from inside the walls, as if the very structure of the facility was vibrating with the chant now. I passed a window and looked out, only to find concrete behind the glass. No sky, no trees, just gray, endless and unbroken, like the building had been moved while I was asleep, or worse, like it had never existed in the real world to begin with. That was when I truly panicked. I wasn't escaping a place. I was escaping a state of frequency, and they were trying to tune me back into it before I could unlearn the pitch. At the far end of the sublevel, I found a loading dock door propped open with a broomstick. It was the only breach I'd seen in the building's geometry. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted through, felt cool air hit my face for the first time in what felt like weeks, and stumbled out on gravel. No signs, no fence, no road, just woods. I ran until I couldn't hear the chant anymore, until my breath was ragged and my throat felt torn from cold air and fear. I collapsed against a tree and watched the sky. Too stunned to cry. The stars above me looked wrong. Too close, too still. But they weren't chanting. That was all I cared about. I was out. I'd broken the rhythm, for now. But in the back of my mind, I could still hear a faint echo like a choir searching for the voice that left the harmony. Incomplete. They hadn't stopped. They were just rehearsing without me. It's been over a year since I left the facility, and I still don't know if what happened to me was part of a scientific failure, some underground experiment gone wrong, or something older than either. I don't tell people the full story anymore. I've stopped trying to convince anyone. I don't even say sleep paralysis when they ask, what's wrong with me now? I just say I don't sleep well, that I have bad dreams. People accept that. They always do. It's easier than explaining that I spent 2 weeks inside a building where sound had weight, where your name could be used like a key, and where the ones you trusted most turned into mouths for something else. I'm not the same person who walked in there, and even though I made it out, I know I absolutely know they're not finished with me. I've just been put on pause. I've tried to find the place again, online, through maps, through every search term and data trail I could think of, but there's nothing. No record of the Somnolunlucid Institute, no reviews, no research papers, no staff photos. It's like it was scrubbed clean or never existed. The payment I received, it was a prepaid card that stopped working 3 days after I left. No return address, no transaction history, the contact number disconnected. The clothes I left with gray hoodie, socks, everything disintegrated within weeks. Literally fell apart in the wash. My sleep journals disappeared from my luggage, and the backup files I stored online. Corrupted, every single one. I'm not stupid. I know when I'm being erased. They didn't want to delete me. They wanted to overwrite me, turn me into something that fit back into the choir without resistance. I've kept one thing from the study, a torn index card I found under my pillow on the last night. One that wasn't in anyone's assigned code word stack. It has a single phrase written on it in crooked black pen. Silence is memory. I don't know what it means exactly, but I haven't thrown it away. I can't. On nights when the humming starts again just faint, just under the edge of perception, I take the card out and read it over and over like it might anchor me, like it might remind me that I'm still me, that I haven't fallen back into sync, but I can feel it pulling. The rhythm of my breath sometimes aligns too closely with things I'm not hearing. My footsteps match beats I don't remember walking. I catch myself pausing in doorways, listening, like I'm waiting for a cue. That's what terrifies me most. Not that I hear them, but that I might respond when they finally call again. A few weeks ago, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a single cassette tape, unlabeled, and a note. You were never off key, just early. I played the tape once, just once. It wasn't music. It was my voice, slow, breathy, repeating one sentence in that wrong rhythm they used. We are what listens back. My mouth went dry. My ears rang for hours after. I threw the tape into the river that same night, but the words didn't leave. I hear them now in whispers, in conversations where they don't belong, in the silence between my own thoughts. They're rehearsing again. I think they're almost ready, and I don't think they need the facility anymore. I think they've moved on to people, to devices, to sound itself, and when they're finished, there won't be an escape. There'll just be harmony. I still try to stay awake most nights, but it's harder now. The hum makes it easy to drift. It sounds like a refrigerator, or traffic outside, or white noise from the TV, but it's not. It's them, testing tones, finding voices, relearning the language they stole from the ones who blinked along. And last night, I heard my own voice, again not in my room, not in my head, but from my phone speaker while it sat idle on my nightstand. No music playing, no calls, just silence and then me, whispering, "We begin in 3. I threw the phone across the room and unplugged everything, but the voice didn't stop. It kept counting. 1, 2, and then nothing. That's where I am now, stuck between 2 and 3, waiting for the next sound to tell me if I'm still alone. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts or sleep demons or any of that nonsense, I was a light sleeper, sure, but I always chalked that up to stress or too much coffee. When I moved into my new apartment last spring mid-April, I think I was just relieved to finally be on my own after a long, miserable breakup with someone who made even breathing feel like a competition. The place was on the third floor of an old building just outside Chicago. It had creaky floorboards, windows that whined when they opened, and this weird floral wallpaper that looked like it had been there since the 70s. But the rent was cheap, and I needed a win. The landlord, Mr. Glover, was this old guy with cloudy eyes who mostly spoke in grunts, but he seemed harmless enough. He warned me that the apartment got quiet in a strange way, whatever that meant. I laughed it off. I bought a second-hand mattress from a local thrift store. It was queen-size and surprisingly firm, no bed frame, just mattress straight on the wooden floor. I even remember joking with the delivery guy about how many people probably died on it. He didn't laugh. I should have taken that as a hint. The first few nights were uneventful. Actually, they were peaceful. No more arguing, no more being told my anxiety was performative, no more sleeping with one eye open. I could finally hear my own thoughts at night. Looking back though, I should have paid more attention to what those thoughts were whispering. On the fifth night, something weird happened. I woke up around 3 a.m. That classic witching hour nonsense completely. Frozen. I could see the dim streetlight coming through the blinds, casting these long shadows across the floor, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. My lungs felt like they were trapped inside a box. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was this breathy whimper. There was something in the corner, a shape. At first I thought it was just a pile of laundry I hadn't folded, but then it moved or more like it shimmered. I couldn't hear anything, no footsteps, no breathing, but I felt something heavy near my chest. Like gravity had shifted and was pressing me into the mattress. It ended as suddenly as it began. One blink and I was up, gasping, sweat drenching the neckline of my old Deftones shirt. I sat there for a while, telling myself it was just stress, just bad dreams, just the breakup messing with my head. People talk about sleep paralysis like it's terrifying, and it is. But that first time, I thought I was just exhausted. I took a Tylenol PM the next night and passed out. I'll skip the boring stuff for a bit. A couple weeks passed. I started getting settled, got my coffee maker working, bought a few succulents from the farmer's market, even made a few friends. In the building, there was a girl named Alina across the hall who worked nights at a 24-hour vet clinic, and we'd exchange weird looks every time we passed each other like, "Are you real or just a hallucination?" But then I started noticing things, little things. My earbuds went missing, just the left one, always the left. A sock vanished from a fresh laundry load. My copy of House of Leaves was gone for a full day and then reappeared on the kitchen counter, not my bookshelf. It sounds dumb, I know, but I started feeling watched. Not all the time, just at night, just right before I'd fall asleep. That's when it hit me. It wasn't that my stuff was moving. It was that something else was moving around while I wasn't. The paralysis came back, stronger this time. I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting at the edge of the mattress, not standing in the corner, not whispering, sitting, like they were waiting. I couldn't lift my head to look. I could only stare forward and hope I wasn't actually feeling what I was feeling. My neck ached afterward like I'd strained every muscle trying to move just a fraction of an inch. I told Alina about it one morning while we were both fumbling for mail. She went really quiet and said, "You sleep on the floor, right?" I said, "Yeah," and she just nodded. "You might want to check underneath sometime," she said. That was it. Then she closed her door. I didn't sleep for 2 nights after that. I kept telling myself it was a joke, or maybe she dealt with mice or raccoons or something gross like that. But on the third night, I drank 2 glasses of wine, put on a playlist of ambient rain, and laid down. That night, the figure didn't appear in the corner. There was no shimmering. There was sound, not loud, just rustling, close to my ear, like someone breathing through wet cloth. When I tried to move, my arms felt pinned. My legs tingled like they were asleep. My eyes stayed wide open, and then I felt it hands, flat against my back, under me, as if someone was pressed beneath the mattress, holding me up. The air felt tight, not hot, not cold, just thick. I tried to scream and managed to squeak. The mattress pulsed underneath me, like it was breathing, and then it stopped. Everything. No more hands, no more breathing. Just silence. Too much silence. Like the world hit mute. I sat up with a jolt. The room was empty. My earbuds were on the floor, twisted like a noose. My missing sock was folded and sitting on top of the mattress, and under it. When I finally had the guts to look, I found scratches on the wooden floor. Long, parallel lines where the mattress had been dragged. I didn't sleep the next night, or the night after, but I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I could figure it out. Maybe I thought I could beat it. Looking back though, I think it was already inside. The strange thing is, right after that night with the rustling and the weight beneath me, things got quiet again. I mean really quiet. No more paralysis. No weird sounds. Nothing going missing. I actually began to feel stupid for letting it mess with my head. I even convinced myself that the scratches under the mattress had probably always been there, and I just hadn't noticed before. My brain was desperate to normalize things, to push it all into a dark drawer labeled just stress. I even rearranged the room, moved the mattress to the other side. I told myself it was to follow the sun coming through the window, but deep down, I just didn't want to sleep above that spot again. I fell back into a routine, one I clung to like a life raft. Every morning started with the hiss of my old kettle, black coffee in my chipped, world's okayest human mug, and scrolling through emails I had no intention of replying to. I got a part-time editing gig from a local podcast, nothing fancy, but enough to justify staying in that apartment. I made playlists for every hour of the day, rain sounds for mornings, lo-fi beats for afternoons, white noise for nights. The noise helped. It gave my brain something to grab onto, something that felt structured and safe. Like if I controlled the sound, I could control what might be listening. One weekend, I invited my brother to visit. He's younger than me by 3 years, but somehow more grown up. Mortgage, fiancé, golden retriever, all that. He didn't stay long, just one night, but I remember feeling relieved when he crashed on the couch. There was something comforting about knowing someone else was there. We stayed up eating leftover Chinese and making fun of YouTube ghost videos. When I finally went to bed that night, I slept harder than I had in weeks. No shadow figures, no pressure, just rest. Deep, dreamless rest. I woke up thinking maybe everything really had passed. Maybe it had just been a phase. That illusion didn't last. A few days after my brother left, I noticed a chill return to the air. Not in temperature, but in tone. My apartment had this silence that wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt expectant. The kind of quiet you feel in the second before someone breaks bad news. Even the white noise didn't mask it. I'd be working on a podcast file and suddenly realize I'd stopped hearing the world. Around me, no cars outside, no neighbors above, just this thick, humming stillness that made my skin crawl. The kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. One morning, I found the mattress shifted again just slightly, an inch or two to the left. At first, I thought it was me tossing and turning in my sleep, but when I knelt to look beneath it, I found more marks. These weren't scratches though. These were small, dark smudges almost like greasy fingerprints pressed against the wood, and one of them, I swear, had 4 finger marks and 1 thumb, like a handprint. I stared at it for way too long, trying to convince myself it was an oil stain, or maybe something I'd spilled before and forgotten, but it wasn't on the surface. It was pressed into the wood, like the skin had heat, or weight, or something. Heavier than either, I started going to bed later and later, sometimes not sleeping at all. I convinced myself I was just being dramatic, that maybe I'd seen too many horror movies, that I needed to reclaim the mattress. That's how I thought about it, reclaiming the space. I even went and bought a basic metal bed frame from a discount store downtown, hauled it up 3 flights of stairs by myself, sweating and cursing the whole way. Took me 2 hours to put it together, but once the mattress was off the floor, I felt better, like putting distance between me and whatever had been underneath. Might give me control again, like I'd won a round or something. For a little while, it worked. No paralysis, no weird sounds. I even found my left earbuds tucked into the pocket of an old coat I hadn't worn in weeks. A small win, but a win nonetheless. I started sleeping earlier, waking up with fewer headaches. I was even considering inviting Alina over for dinner one night, just to have human contact again. I wanted to tell her how it had all stopped, how I beat it. I should have known better. The signs were all there. I just didn't want to look at them long enough to admit they were real. But one night, as I reached under the bed for my phone charger, my fingers brushed something that felt warm. Not plastic, not metal, skin. I yanked my hand back so fast I scraped my knuckles. On the metal frame, the pain didn't even register. At first, All I could think about was how warm it had felt. Not soft, not rubbery like a toy or an old sock warm, like skin that had been alive seconds ago. But when I forced myself to look under the bed with my phone flashlight, there was nothing, not even dust, which somehow felt more unsettling. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding my breath like the air might give something away if I listened closely enough. I didn't hear anything, but that didn't mean nothing was there. That night, I slept with the lights on. It didn't help much. I woke up 3 times in a cold sweat, convinced I'd heard breathing that wasn't mine. The next morning, I noticed my apartment keys were gone. Not the spare set, I'm talking about the ones I use every day, clipped to a blue carabiner that I always leave in the ceramic bowl by the door. I tore the place apart looking for them, even checked the fridge, which I know sounds stupid, but I was that desperate. Nothing. I had to call the landlord to come unlock the main door for me. When Mr. Glover showed up, he looked irritated, like I dragged him out of hibernation. I tried to explain what was happening just enough to make it sound like a regular concern, not a full-on breakdown. He cut me off halfway through and said, "Things go missing in old buildings, air shifts, knock stuff around. Don't overthink it." Then he handed me a rusted spare key and left without saying goodbye. I wanted to believe he was right. I really did. But then I started noticing that the missing things weren't just random anymore. They were personal. My toothbrush disappeared one morning. Not a pack of them, just the one I was using. The handle was still wet the night before. Gone the next day. My journal vanished for nearly a week and then reappeared. But the page I'd written about the sleep paralysis had been torn out. I asked myself over and over if I could have done it and forgotten. But I'm not the kind of person who forgets things like that. And even if I had, why would I only tear out that page? That one entry that described how something had touched me from under the bed. I brought it up to Alina in the hallway a few days later. She looked tired, more than usual. Dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't slept in days. When I mentioned the missing items, she didn't look surprised. She just nodded slowly and said, "They like things that are close to your skin." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. But she didn't. She turned away and went back into her apartment without another word. That's when I started noticing the way her doorknob was always warm when I passed by, like someone had just touched it seconds before. I also noticed she never left it open, not even a crack. It was like she was trying to keep something out or in. I stopped sleeping again. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd imagine those greasy fingerprints on the floorboards, or the weird warmth against my palm. I tried moving the mattress again, back to the other side of the room, but the frame made a horrible screeching noise like metal grinding on bone. I swear, it echoed longer than it should have. That night, I dreamt I was inside the mattress, pressed between coils and stuffing, unable to scream. I could hear someone pacing above me, whispering things I couldn't make out, like they were testing the soundproofing. I woke up gasping, clawing at the sheets like they were holding me down. My nails left marks on the fabric, 5 long streaks. I wish I could say they were the only ones. Looking back though, the biggest red flag wasn't the missing stuff or the dreams. It was the silence. I stopped hearing my neighbors completely. No footsteps above, no laughter from the family next door. Not even the usual distant thud of someone slamming their cabinet to hard. It was like the building was empty, like everyone else had packed up and left without telling me. I knocked on a few doors one afternoon. No answer. I even texted Alina, asking if she was okay. The message stayed undelivered. No reply. I haven't seen her since. Her door is still shut, but now there's this faint, low sound behind it at night, like humming, but off-key, like someone trying to remember a song they used to love before it broke them. I started staying awake past 4 a.m. most nights, because that's when the air felt heaviest, like the room had lungs of its own. I'd sit in the corner by the window with a hoodie over my head, headphones in, pretending the static from some true crime podcast could drown out the feeling of being watched. It never did. The worst part wasn't the moments when something happened, it was the long stretches where nothing did. That's when the silence became unbearable. I knew it was listening. I couldn't see it, couldn't prove it, but I knew something waited for me to slip, to close my eyes a second too long, or fall asleep sitting up with my neck at the wrong angle. One night, maybe 3 weeks after the last time I'd seen Alina, I heard movement beneath the mattress again, not loud thumps or scurrying, but slow, deliberate pressure, like a body shifting to get comfortable. I froze and waited, eyes wide, open, heartbeat pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The sound stopped, then, unmistakably, There was a knock, 3 slow knocks from directly under the bed. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I don't mean I was scared, I mean my throat didn't work. It was the same frozen feeling from before, like something had hijacked my body the moment it sensed fear. I couldn't even cry. I just lay there, every muscle tense until sunrise. When I finally rolled off the mattress in the morning, there were new indentations in the floor. Fresh. I hadn't seen them before. Deeper than the last ones. I called my mom the next day. I didn't tell her everything, just said I wasn't sleeping well and that my anxiety was getting worse. She offered to send money so I could break my lease and move back in with her for a while. But I lied and said I was fine. I don't know why I said no. Maybe part of me thought I could fix it. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit that I was scared of my own bed. That's not something people say out loud. Beds are supposed to be safe, warm, yours, not shared with something that doesn't have a voice, but still knows your name. I stopped using it altogether for a few days and tried to sleep on the couch. But it wasn't any better. The pressure didn't follow me there, but the dreams did. They were different now. Worse, in the dreams, I wasn't frozen. I was under the mattress. I could see the coils above me, layers of padding, 1,000 stains. No one ever noticed. I could see up through the fabric like it was paper thin, and someone was sleeping above me. I was watching myself sleep, and then a shape crawled next to me in that tight, cramped space. It didn't touch me. It just curled its fingers toward its mouth and shushed me. Its skin was gray, papery, but somehow wet at the same time. Its mouth didn't move, but I heard it say, "You're softer when you're sad." I woke up with the taste of mildew in my mouth and the feeling that someone had kissed my forehead. While I was out, I tried calling the building's emergency maintenance line the next day to report strange noises and asked if someone could check the floorboards. The guy on the phone didn't even pretend to care. He asked if I'd spilled anything or left food out. I told him no. And he said, and I remember this exactly, then it's probably just old pipes or settling wood. Happens all the time in these buildings. Don't let it get to your head. It was such a clean, dismissive answer that it felt rehearsed, like he'd said it to tenants before, like this was normal. I hung up and didn't bother calling again. Things escalated fast after that. I started noticing handprints in the steam on my bathroom mirror, but only when I hadn't used hot water. They'd be there in the mornings, even if I hadn't showered. Once, there were 2 sets, one large, one small, both of them pressed flat like someone was leaning close to see their reflection. I started keeping my lights on 24/7s. I let candles burn out in the sink just to feel something warm and flickering nearby. My sleep came in 10-minute bursts now, filled with vivid, crawling dread and the sense that someone was learning the shape of me, mapping it from beneath. Like my body had become familiar to something that wasn't supposed to touch it. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I hadn't slept in almost 2 days, and my body was starting to betray me. Trembling hands, blurred vision, even short-term memory glitches. I knocked over a mug of coffee and just stared at it spreading across the floor like ink. That's when I noticed something, the edge of a small slit in the carpet beneath the bed. It hadn't been there before. I would have noticed. The carpet had always been worn, but this was different, clean-cut, like someone had made it with a blade and folded it back down to hide it. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe instinct or just pure exhaustion. But I pulled the mattress off the frame completely and dragged the bed frame away. My heart was hammering as I peeled back the carpet. What I found underneath still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. There was a small, rotted opening in the floorboards, a hole that had been carefully cut too clean to be accidental, too dark to see into. I shone my phone light down inside and saw what looked like fabric. At first I thought it was just insulation or maybe an old blanket stuffed in there. But when I reached down and pulled it out, I realized it was clothing, specifically a hoodie. My hoodie, one I lost weeks ago and blamed on the laundromat. But it wasn't alone. There was also a pair of my socks, one of my missing notebooks, a used toothbrush, and worst of all, my old driver's license. Not the current one, the old one, the one I'd shredded when I moved apartments. It had been taped back together, carefully, and placed inside a Ziploc bag. The edges of the photo were wet, like someone had been licking it. I nearly threw up right there on the floor. I backed away from the hole so fast I tripped over the mattress and landed hard against the wall. That's when I realized just how much I'd missed. The entire wall next to the bed right where I laid my head every night was covered in scratches. Not random ones, but organized, layered ones. Some looked almost like tally marks, others spelled things out. I remember 3 words most clearly. You're warm now. That's when it hit me. Someone or something had been living under my bed. Not just haunting it. Not visiting. Living. Watching. Touching. I sat there on the floor, completely still, waiting to hear movement. But all I heard was the slow, rhythmic tick of the kitchen clock and my own ragged breathing. I grabbed everything from the hole and stuffed it in a trash bag, but I didn't throw it out. Not yet. Part of me wanted to call the police. The other part, the louder one, told me not to. What was I going to say? Hi, there's evidence that something non-human has been living under my bed for weeks, and it's been stealing my socks and licking my ID photo. They'd write me off as crazy, and maybe I was crazy, but that didn't make the scratches or the hole go away. I went to Mr. Glover that afternoon and showed him the bag. He looked inside, barely glanced at it, and then gave me the same flat look he'd given me the day he brought the spare key. This building's seen things, he said. Sometimes it keeps pieces of people. I asked him if he was serious. He didn't answer, just walked back inside his office and shut the door. I stood there for a long time, clutching the bag, like it might bite me. That night, I pushed the mattress into the living room. I didn't want to be near that hole, near those scratches, near that wall ever again. But when I went to sleep on the floor by the couch, I had the worst sleep paralysis episode I've ever experienced. It started with the usual pressure, but then I felt the air change, not just around me, inside me, like something had entered my lungs, sat in my rib cage, and claimed the space. I couldn't move or blink, but I could see, and this time, there wasn't just one shadow figure, there were 2. One was standing in the corner, the other crawling out from underneath the couch, slow, deliberate. I could hear its joints pop as it moved, its spine clicking into place as it rose to meet me. When it finally reached my face, it didn't whisper. It opened its mouth wide and screamed, not loud, not angry. It was hungry. I woke up drenched in sweat, with blood on my lip from biting down so hard I'd broken the skin. My body ached in ways I couldn't explain. My shoulders were sore like I'd been pinned to the ground. My arms weak like I'd fought off something, heavy in my sleep. But the worst part, the couch had moved, just slightly, a few inches from where I left it, and underneath it, in the place where I'd seen the figure crawl out, there were more fingerprints, clear, oily, fresh. I didn't sleep again for 2 nights. I just sat with my back against the wall, lights on, eyes twitching at every sound. Something had been feeding off me, taking parts, learning me, and now it wasn't hiding anymore. I finally broke. After that last episode, I couldn't keep pretending I had control over anything. My body wasn't mine anymore. My sleep wasn't mine. My home definitely wasn't mine. That morning, still trembling and bleeding from my lip, I called my brother. I didn't even try to explain it rationally. I just told him, something's in my apartment. I don't know what it is, but I can't stay here. He must have heard something in my voice that scared him, because he didn't argue. He said he'd drive over after work and help me pack up. I only had to make it till the evening. That's what I kept telling myself, just survive until dark. That word felt heavier than usual. Survive, not wait, not rest, just hang on. The day passed like a blur. I kept the lights on, every single one. I didn't use the bathroom with the door closed. I refused to sit on the couch or go near the mattress, which now sat tilted in the hallway like a dead thing no one wanted to bury. I tried to eat, but couldn't swallow. My heart kept racing every time I looked at the door, half expecting it to open without sound and reveal something that shouldn't have a face. By 4 p.m., I started hearing scratching from under the floor again, light at first, like fingernails on cardboard, but then heavier, more like claws on wood. It wasn't random anymore. It was rhythmic, steady, following a pattern, and it wasn't coming from the bedroom. This time it was moving across the apartment, toward me. Inch by inch, I grabbed the trash bag full of the items I'd found and stood by the front door, with my phone in my hand. I kept checking the peephole even though I wasn't sure. I was more afraid of something breaking in or something already inside. When my brother finally texted, "Here," I nearly collapsed from relief. I flung the door open and ran down the stairs barefoot, not even bothering to lock up behind me. I don't think I've ever hugged someone as hard as I hugged him that day. He looked shocked at how bad I'd gotten, bloodshot eyes, bruised arms from restless nights, a shaking hand that wouldn't stay still. I told him everything in the car, not all at once, but in pieces. Like vomiting out a confession I wasn't sure I believed until I heard myself say it out loud. We went back up together, and I didn't want to, but I knew I couldn't leave my laptop and a few important things behind. The moment we stepped into the apartment, I could feel how wrong it had gotten. The air was heavy and damp, like someone had boiled water and forgotten to open a window. The lights were all still on, but they looked dimmer, more yellow than white. My brother said something felt off, but I could tell he didn't want to say more. He helped me grab a few bags, and I noticed him glancing at the hallway mattress without asking why it was there. Then he froze. I looked to see what he was staring at, and my blood turned to ice. The couch had moved again, this time flipped over entirely, legs in the air like a corpse, and carved into the wall behind it were 5 words. "Don't bring him here to." My brother asked if I did that. I just shook my head and backed out of the room. We ran. I didn't bother closing the door. We didn't speak until we were back in the car, halfway down the block. Then my brother turned to me and asked if I'd ever checked the attic above the apartment. I told him there wasn't one, just insulation and a sealed panel in the ceiling. He didn't respond. He just stared ahead and gripped the wheel like something might crawl across the windshield if he blinked along. I don't know how to describe the mix of guilt and terror I felt in that moment, knowing that something had watched me sleep, had touched me, and had waited until I brought someone else into the space before revealing what it could do. I left that building behind, but the feeling hasn't left me, not even a little. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was a shot of my apartment's bedroom, taken from floor level, angled up toward where the mattress used to be. The only thing in the frame was a single word written across the floor in what looked like dried spit or old blood: "Stay." I deleted it, blocked the number, turned off my phone, and stared at the ceiling for the rest of the night. But I never stopped thinking about the angle that photo had been taken from. It was low, like whoever took it hadn't been standing in the room. They'd been underneath again, waiting. It's been 5 months since I left that apartment. I haven't been back, haven't asked about it, haven't driven past the street it sat on. My brother helped me move in with our cousin temporarily, and for a while, I convinced myself I was getting better. I started sleeping again, little by little. It's stretches that actually left me rested. No more shadow figures, no more missing things, no more freezing in my own skin. I threw away the mattress. I even burned the old hoodie I found in that hole. It was like scrubbing my life clean of something I didn't know how to name. And for a while, I believed that I'd made it out, that it hadn't followed me. But fear doesn't just vanish when the door closes behind you. Sometimes it hides, it hibernates, and sometimes it waits until you let your guard down before crawling back up to the surface. The first sign came about a month ago. I woke up with dirt under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there. Not just dust, dirt, like I'd been digging. I hadn't left the house that day. I hadn't even opened the window. I tried to dismiss it, tell myself maybe I'd scratched at the plant by my nightstand in my sleep. But that didn't make sense. The soil in the pot was bone dry and untouched. I scrubbed my hands clean and promised myself I wouldn't let the panic start again. I kept telling myself it was a dream, or some leftover stress, or just the ghost of something I hadn't truly gotten over. But then I started hearing sounds again, muffled knocks, not from the walls this time, but from under the floor, beneath the bed. 3 slow, dragging knocks at 3:17 a.m. Always the same, always followed by silence that lasted a beat too long. 2 weeks ago, I found one of my old notebooks under my bed. It wasn't the one I'd brought with me. It was one I'd thrown away. I know this because I recognized the rip across the front page, the exact tear I made the night I was packing, when I told myself I needed to start over and leave everything connected to that place behind. It was resting under the center of my bed, like someone had gently placed it there, as if to say, I never left. That night, I didn't sleep. I left every light on, just like before. I laid there, barely breathing, with my phone clutched to my chest, too afraid to close my eyes. And at 3:17 exactly, the knocks came again, 3 slow thuds that seemed to rise from beneath me, like something knocking gently on a coffin lid, just checking to see if I'd answer. The dreams came back a few nights later, stronger this time. I was paralyzed again, body stiff, breath caught in my throat like a hook. Only now, I wasn't just frozen, I was aware. I could feel the pressure of hands cupping the base of my spine. The skin of my back prickled like it was being memorized. Something whispered into my ear, a wet, Gurgled hiss I couldn't fully understand, but I remember 3 words clear as day. You're home now. I haven't told anyone. Not my brother, not my cousin, not my therapist. I know how it sounds. I know how I sound, but I also know I'm not imagining this. I know what it felt like to have something crawl out from beneath me. I know what it means when things disappear and come back soaked in silence. I know what it's like to feel watched by something that never had eyes to begin with. Last night, I received a package. No return address, just my name on the front in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single out of my old mattress tag, torn at the edge, yellowed, still damp. The part with the "do not remove under penalty of law" warning had been scratched out. Below that, written in the same ink used to mark my walls, was a date next Thursday. No message, no threat, just a timestamp, like an appointment with something that doesn't need to ask for permission anymore. I haven't slept since. Every noise makes my heart race. Every draft across my ankles makes me want to scream. And every time I close my eyes, I imagine that slow, dragging crawl beginning again beneath the frame. Looking back though, the signs were all there. I should have trusted my gut the first time. I should have thrown the mattress out before I ever slept on it. I should have left when I found the hole, when I found the handprints, when I heard the breathing. But I didn't. I stayed. I ignored it. And now it knows me. It knows how I sleep, how I twitch, how I whisper my own name to calm down in the dark. It knows the pattern of my breath, the shape of my spine, the pressure points in my back. I don't know how long I have before it stops knocking. I don't know if it ever really left that apartment or if it's just figured out how to live beneath new floors. But I do know this. I'm not alone in this bed. I never was. And if you're reading this, don't ever ignore the silence under your mattress.